83 billion, which is close to like 1/4 of our market. It's an unsustainable pace, and we think that's definitely going to revert.
You know, Eric, I'm curious how much politics plays into muni issuance. You know, we're such a divided political environment, at least on the national level. I assume on the local level too. Is that possibly contributing to the drying up of issuance?
Yeah, definitely. So look, we're working on building a sentiment tracker for all the news flow that comes over the terminal to get an idea of, on the local level, sort of what voters are thinking about deficits, about school districts, about referendums, about taxes, all those sort of things. And there's been a palpable uptick in headlines that we've seen talking about voters not approving bond referendums. And that's definitely sort of a tide shift. I definitely think, again, going into that election year where inflation is and where taxes are, that there is some concern for excess spending in some of these localities.
All right, taxable municipal bond market. Yes, that is an oxymoron in my mind. I buy these things only because they're tax exempt. And now you're telling me about a taxable market. A, what is the taxable market? And B, how's it going?
Quite simply, munis that are taxable, right? They're not subject to the same provisions and regulations that exempt munis are. And it's a pretty robust market. And I think what's super interesting about the taxable muni market is that you could have bonds that come to market that have traditional municipal CUSIPs, but there's actually a lot of issuance in the corporate market that are taxable munis, especially like big liquid higher ed names like Harvard, like Princeton, and the state of California, perfect example of that, right? So, the issuance has been semi-decent this year. Returns not so much because they tend to be more highly correlated to the treasury market. So you're looking at about a 76 basis point loss thus far this year. Still outperforming treasuries, but not as great as regular munis.
Well, where do you look for that correlation with munis? What is sort of the most comparable asset class when you're trying to figure out, the appetite for muni investors?
I mean, it really is probably going to be looking at that treasury comparison, right? Because at the end of the day, we are a function of the U.S. tax code and a function of treasuries. We don't follow lock and step 1 by 1 basis point, but directionally, we sort of tend to follow where treasuries are going. I think this year is a bit of an anomaly, and that relationship has broken down somewhat since COVID started. But I think that when you have this sort of vacuum and lack of supply, munis will tend to outperform, and we're seeing that right now.
It was interesting we talked about, and being a former banker, this is kind of how I think about the municipal bond market, is Citi closed their municipal bond desk, which I think is sacrilege. I do understand the economics from Jane Fraser in terms of improving returns, but it seems, I just read day after day, all those bankers pretty much have found jobs running desks around the street, going to, it seems like other investment banks are just taking this as an opportunity to beef up.
Yeah, they definitely picked over that carcass, right? I mean, there was probably like 3 straight weeks where we saw, placement advertisements for where those folks landed, whether it was traders or public finance bankers or salespeople. So look, from an employment standpoint, I love it because I want to see full employment in the muni market. From a liquidity standpoint, it's yet to be seen, right? The argument could definitely be made that you had a big player in the market not providing liquidity, and at a time when, values are really rich and desks in general are cutting back on what they're actually holding and taking into stock, that could really sort of create sort of a perfect storm. I think we'll be able to sort of tell more come year end and see like how much of their exit really weighed on the market.
Yeah, interesting stuff. So Citi out of the municipal bond market, it's just, I can't imagine. I mean, you think of Citi as like the #1 corporate lender, municipal lender, nation states, so it's just crazy. Eric Kozatsky, thanks so much for joining us. Eric Kozatsky, he's a senior municipal bond strategist at Bloomberg Intelligence, joining us from the Princeton office. And judging by his background, he does not have a lot of his colleagues around there, taking advantage of that hybrid work schedule, I guess, which is not really afforded to us, is it?
Not on the radio, no.
Not on the radio. All right,
I still get a day at home every now and then. Though.
You do. Good for you. Good for you. Just refresh and recharge the batteries. Good for you. Looking at the markets here, S&P kind of unchanged on the day. The Dow off about 0.4%, but got a little bit of a lift here, about 12 points on the NASDAQ here. I'm looking at the Russell off about 0.8%. So we're looking at some of those smaller cap stocks. In the yield front, 10-year Treasury off about 5.5 basis points, 4.21% on your 10-year. On the commodities front, WTI crude oil just off slightly. We're just under $81 per barrel, a little bit higher than I'd like to see, given that I drive occasionally. Bitcoin Bitcoin, it is down 2% here, 64,200. It was just a cup of coffee ago, as Tom Keene would say, that this thing was at $73,000 per token. So the volatility in the underlying Bitcoin has just been extraordinary as more and more of that goes into the spot ETF structure as well. And there's also that halving thing, which means they're going to, when you do mine a new Bitcoin starting, I think, this next month.
Yeah, next month.
Yeah, you get half as many as you did before, i.e., tightening up on the supply. With our news in New York City, here is Michael Barr.
Well, Mike, thank you very much. We'll keep an eye on the House vote that's going on right now on the $1.2 trillion spending package to keep the government operating. The House has to pass it, and then the Senate by midnight. Vote still going on right now. Russia and China have vetoed a U.S.-sponsored UN resolution calling for an immediate and sustained ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war in Gaza to protect civilians and enable humanitarian aid to be delivered to more than 2 million hungry Palestinians. Before the vote, UN Vasily Nebezhny, through an interpreter, said the U.S. resolution does not actually call for a ceasefire in Gaza.
We have already stated that we will no longer tolerate pointless resolutions which do not contain a call for a ceasefire, which lead us to nowhere.
He also accused U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and U.S. Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield of misleading the international community for politicized reasons. Thomas-Greenfield said Russia and China were being petty.
Russia and China simply did not want to vote for a resolution that was penned by the United States because it would rather see us fail than to see this council succeed.
Today's vote in the 15-member Security Council was 11 members in favor, 3 against, and 1 abstention. A new warning for hotel guests. With the right technology, researchers posing as hackers say they've uncovered a way to hack into key cards to open millions of doors at hotels around the world. Andy Greenberg of Wired magazine reports there's an urgent push now to fix the flaw.
We also have to consider that they may have actually done it in the past. These more professional, profit-motivated, or politically motivated hackers, and they may have even exploited these locks in secret to get into hotel rooms for profit or even for kind of intelligence purposes.
Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
11:40 on Wall Street. I'm Nathan Hager. We check the markets all day long on Bloomberg. We're watching the stock rally take a bit of a breather here. The market, though, is still heading to its best week of 2024. With speculation the Fed is going to be able to cut interest rates as soon as June. But former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers says Chairman Powell and company are itchy fingers when it comes to easier policy.
We've got GDP growth rising, if anything, faster than potential. We have financial conditions, the holistic measure of monetary policy, at a very loose level. I don't know why we're in such a hurry to be talking about moving towards the accelerator.
Hear more from former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers on Bloomberg's Wall Street Week with David Weston, 6 p.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg Radio and Television. As for the market, we check it for you all day long here on Bloomberg. The S&P 500 is down 5 points, or 0.1%. Dow Jones Industrial Average down 164 points, a decline of 0.4%. The NASDAQ Composite is higher by 2 points. 10-year Treasury is up 13.30 seconds now. The yield 4.21%. 2-year 4.59%. NYMEX crude's down about 0.1%, just shy of $81 a barrel at $80.99. COMEX gold down 0.2% at $21.9190 per ounce. The euro at 1.0815 against the dollar. The yen 151.33. Bitcoin declining. ETF speculation down about 2.4%, just shy of $64,000. That's Bloomberg Business Flash. Bloomberg Intelligence with Paul Sweeney and Mike Regan continues.
Nathan Hager, thank you so much for that. We appreciate it. Michael Regan sitting in for Alex Steele should be back Monday. I'm Paul Sweeney. We're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, streaming live on YouTube as well. So head over to youtube.com and search Bloomberg Podcast. Story out of Tesla here. Tesla trims car output in China as EV sales growth slows. And that is probably the number one issue, I would think, for this stock, even for the industry a little bit, is kind of what is the ultimate demand for electric vehicles here in the near term, but then even also going forward. Tesla stock obviously is taking it on the chin. It's up about 2% today, but year to date it's off about 32%. So there's some concern out there about demand. So let's get right to it. Steve Mann, he's our global autos research analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence. He's based out of Princeton, New Jersey, joining us via Zoom here. So Steve, talk to us about this news from Tesla trimming its output in China. What's driving that?
Yeah, Paul, I mean, the stock's down about 1.5%, like you said. I think the consensus have pretty much factored in the potential cuts in production given the demand. I think demand, in China, it is slowing down. There's a lot of price cutting, not just from Tesla, but from BYD and Geely. It's a never-ending price cutting cycle over there. In the U.S., we're actually forecasting to be up 9%, definitely single digit, down from double-digit growth in the past couple of years. So, I think the production cuts are probably mainly driven by the U.S. and the China market, European to a lesser extent.
Steve, as you mentioned, BYD, the big competitor to Tesla in China. You always hear how fierce that competition is, but I wonder how the vehicles stack up. Is BYD actually making a car that is as high performance, as has all the bells and whistles of a Tesla, or are they a little bit behind?
I think BYD and other local Chinese automakers, because they're so focused in the Chinese market. I mean, now they're starting to get, kind of extend beyond the China market. They're pretty nimble in addressing some of the needs from the consumer side, especially on the connectivity and all the infotainment system that they have. So they are pretty much catered to the Chinese market. They're doing a pretty good job on that. In terms of quality, they've come up to curve quite a bit. I remember visiting the BYD plant probably around 8-9 years ago. I still see like hammers, people using hammers to punch fenders together. But now they're they've moved well beyond that. I think, not really nationalism, but, with their cheaper cars, with lower cost of production, the Chinese have been very competitive and been taking market share from foreign brands.
All right, so just, Steve, what's your view kind of over the overall demand for electric vehicles globally? The concern is, I think for a lot of investors, that it is materially slowing down. A, do you agree with that? And B, why do you think that is?
It's about affordability. If you look at a lot of the vehicles out there in the U.S. and Europe, EVs out there, they're really expensive. They're above $50,000. There are a few that are below 50. There's not that many that are below 30. So it's really an affordability issue. A lot of the people that can afford EV have, and would like an EV have purchased one. But what's really exciting, I think, in the next couple of years, and I think we'll see a potential cyclical improvement in EVs, is actually in 2025 and 2026, when there's a whole bunch of kind of sub 30,000 EVs come to the marketplace, especially in the U.S. and Europe.
Steve, some days anyone who is on the X social platform might actually forget that Elon Musk is the head of Tesla. He's so focused and active on X in these sort of culture war issues. Is there any sign of that in the numbers yet as far as affecting demand? Is his or his political stances moving the needle at all, turning any potential customers off, do you think?
I think people who buy EVs and are looking to buy a car, I think they are disconnected for some of the rhetoric that comes out from Elon Musk. Their performance in terms of sales is actually no different than what everybody else is seeing. So I really don't think there's a huge impact on sales, based on what he writes on X or what he says on interviews. Not at all.
Talk to us about the profitability of the EV car manufacturing right now. If prices are being cut, the unit profitability, what's going on there? Because they had achieved, I believe, some time ago, positive unit profitability.
They have, and they still are. And look, the one of the issues that was facing the industry in the past 18 months is price cutting. And I'm hoping that, we're right at the tail end of it, because Tesla actually has announced price increases in China starting April 1st. It's about a 5 to 8% increase if you also strip out some of the other incentives that are out there. And they're also planning those price increases in Europe and as well as the U.S. And I think part of that is because the material costs for batteries have ticked up a little bit. So, the material costs for battery increasing could be a catalyst for an end to this seems like a never-ending price cutting.
How's the Cybertruck doing, Steve? Is it meeting expectations?
Cybertrucks, I think it is meeting expectation. They're still ramping that up. Sales have been, they're trying to fill the million unit back order. And according to, what we're hearing in the marketplace, the used vehicles, used vehicles meaning a few weeks, few months old, they're actually selling at, 2 times the amount that they're selling at with the new vehicles.
Wow, really?
So, yeah, so I think there is demand for it, but again, it's not going to be at the same volume as the Model 3 and the Model Y, where they're selling over 1 million units, close to 2 million units. This is still going to be relegated to a niche market, to a smaller group of consumers.
All right, good stuff. Steve Mann, thank you so much for joining us. Always appreciate getting your thoughts. Steve Mann, Global Autos Analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence. All right, there you have it, crossing the Bloomberg terminal. House passes bill to fully fund the government, and they're sending it on to the Senate. To get more on this, we're joined by Janie Shane Zano, professor, Bloomberg Politics contributor, and author of American Democracy in Crisis. Janie, thanks so much for joining us here. I think, do we have her yet, or are we still kind of working on it? Okay, we got her. Awesome. So what do we make of this? I mean, thank goodness they passed this here, but anything unusual going on here in D.C., or is this kind of more of the same, let's get it done at the last minute?
It is more of the same, although I have to say this is highly unusual. We are, 6 months late on this bill. But since this is a positive day, I'm going to try to be positive. They did pass the $1.2 trillion government funding bill, and they now are moving it to the Senate. And of course, only half of the crisis is averted so far because, of course, the Senate is, they're expected to take it up pretty quickly. But as the Senate works, any one senator can slow this thing down. And we know there are about a dozen amendments on the table. So, on the plus side, the senators all want to leave town so they can get their 2-week recess. So that may help them push it to the finish line quicker. But, we still aren't over the hump yet, but we are on our way, so to speak.
Jan, one of the new pieces of news that's emerged over the last few minutes is Punchbowl is reporting that Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene has filed a motion to vacate the speakership. Does that have any risk to this bill? I mean, I would guess not since it's passed, but how does that fit into all of this?
Yeah, I mean, we always expected this would happen, and this has been the way that the conservatives in the House have operated. What's quite startling about this is that this bill is probably more, a little bit more liberal or progressive or pro-democratic, if you will, pro-White House, than the bill which caused them to get rid of Kevin McCarthy. And so, it is not a surprise that one or more member of the House Freedom Caucus, in this case, Marjorie Taylor Greene, has filed. But, at this point, it won't impact this particular bill. And Mike Johnson always knew that this was going to be the result of him working across the aisle and, of course, waiving the 72-hour rule. There was a lot that happened in the last few days that conservatives and Republicans who are, not Freedom Caucus members didn't want. But, to avert a government shutdown, this is what they had to do. Okay, so for us amateurs who don't really know how this plays out, is this, from Marjorie Taylor Greene, is this something that Mr. Johnson needs to be concerned about or no? I don't think so at this point, if only because who would they replace him with? So, nobody wants to be Speaker of the House at this point. So, yes, it's one of those jobs nobody wants. So, yes, he has to be concerned that, a member is doing this, but not surprised. But the reality here is this rule needs to change. This rule that one disgruntled member, whether it's Matt Gaetz in the case of Kevin McCarthy or Marjorie Taylor Greene now or anybody else in the future, can hold up the entire House caucus in terms of the Republican caucus and, quite frankly, in some cases, the government. So I don't think there's much of an appetite for this at this point. We are, so close in the midst of an election period. All these House members have to be back in their districts and they have to be running for re-election. So I don't think there's an appetite, but I think next term, they really do need to change this rule that one member can do this, because it has really made this caucus ungovernable at this point.
And you mentioned that this is more of a progressive-leaning bill than what cost Kevin McCarthy the speakership. What did the Republicans give up a lot of priorities in this bill?
They did. A lot of that was procedural. For instance, having an omnibus, or in this case, a minibus bill at all, was something they didn't want. Waiving the 72 hours to review the bill, something they didn't want. Allowing people to put all of these amendments in, they didn't want, and we have seen that. So there's a lot here. Of course, just looking at one example, on something as important as immigration and homeland security, they wanted H.R. 2. They didn't get it. This bill, has emboldened to a certain extent our ability, so for Border Patrol agents and others at the border, but it doesn't go nearly as far in terms of securing the border as the Republicans wanted. So they did give some up, but of course, negotiation is what you got to do if you're in a bipartisan Washington.
All right, Jeannie, thank you so much for joining us. Jeannie Shane Zaino, professor of Bloomberg Politics, contributor, and author of American Democracy in Crisis. Let's head down to Washington, D.C. right now and get a quick business flash with Nathan Hager.
Yeah, we'll check the markets all day long for you here on Bloomberg. Paul, the S&P 500 is down 0.1% or 6 points. Dow Jones Industrial Average down almost 0.5%, 176 points lower. Nike, the big Dow component that's dragging the overall index lower. Nike shares are down more than 7%. NASDAQ Composite up 9 points. That's a little change to the upside. 10-year Treasury up 14.30 yield 4.21%. NYMEX crude down about 0.25% to $80.85 per barrel. COMEX gold down 0.7% at $21.90.40 per ounce. The euro 1.0811 against the dollar. Bitcoin down 2.5%, trading just shy of 64,000. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now let's get a check of world and national headlines. For that, we turn to Bloomberg's Michael Barr. Michael.
Thank you very much, Nathan. Paul, Mike, lawmakers in the House just passed a $1.2 trillion spending package aimed at preventing a partial government shutdown. Congress has until midnight to pass the bills and keep the government fully operational. On the House floor today, Republican Congressman Ken Calvert of California said the package includes critical defense funding.
A no vote is a vote for China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and Hamas. A vote yes for our men and women in uniform and for all Americans and for our country.
Now, there's more drama to this because Republican Marjorie Taylor Greene filed a motion to vacate Speaker Mike Johnson. We'll see where that goes. As for this measure, it goes to the Senate. The measure includes more than $3 billion in military aid for Israel. The United Nations Security Council failed this morning to pass a resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza as part of a hostage deal. Russia and China, who are permanent members, vetoed the measure proposed by the United States. UN Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield spent the morning urging the Council to get on board with the resolution, but her pleas fell short. She had a pointed message from Moscow.
Russia, who has carried out an unprovoked war on its neighbor, has the audacity and the hypocrisy to throw stones when it lives in a glass house itself.
Russia said it did not like the language in the U.S. resolution. A sad ending in the search for a missing college student in Nashville. Police say after a 2-week search, the body of University of Missouri student Riley Strain was recovered from the Cumberland River in West Nashville this morning. Police say no foul play or any trauma was observed. They're pending an autopsy. Strain, who was 22, went missing on March 8th after a night out at several Nashville bars. Finally, Ronna McDaniel, who stepped down as chairwoman of the Republican National Committee this month, has a new job. McDaniel will be a commentator on NBC and MSNBC. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with the Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Paul?
All right, Michael Barr, thank you so much. Michael Regan holding down the House today for Alex Steele. Thank you very much.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Looking at this story here, the further reporting on this House bill, reporter Eric Wasson and Billy House, they're all over it. I'm just reading their story. The House passed a $1.2 trillion government funding bill hours before a midnight Friday partial government shutdown. But I'm looking at the thing. The Senate's got to approve it before midnight, or there may be some partial shutdown tomorrow of certain federal government.
Yeah, I don't think it would have a huge impact, whatever, weekend operations the federal government has going on. I'm not sure if they're all affected or what are affected, but not quite out of the woods yet as far as some kind of shutdown.
So this bill increases defense appropriations by 3% while keeping overall domestic spending flat. Military troops get a 5.2% pay raise, and there are increases in child care, cancer research, and primary school funding prioritized by Democrats. Republicans, some of the Republican House Democrats overwhelmingly supported the deal, while conservatives largely voted against it. Republicans had sought a 22% cut in domestic spending, new limits on abortion, and restriction on migration. And here's a quote that'll get you. It's clear that the Democrats own the Speaker's gavel. Ultra-conservative Andy Ogles, a Tennessee Republican, complains here. So still some
it's
of that.
Wild. There's really
split.
3 parties now, it
Yes.
feels like.
Yeah, and it's amazing, I guess, in this evenly divided government that literally a handful of representatives from one side or the other can really hold things up. But anyway, this thing gets passed September 30th. Looks like we've got the lights on through September 30th, so good news. You know what we need to do right now? Let's go down to Washington, D.C. Balance of power. Joe Matthew all over this stuff. That's next.
of politics to the world of business. This is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
There's a new move to fire the speaker just as the House votes to avoid a government shutdown tonight. Welcome to the fastest show in politics. As Marjorie Taylor Greene files the motion to vacate, it just happened in protest of the spending bill that appears set to pass, but we don't know. We're going to have a live report from Capitol Hill. Kate Ackley will be with us in a moment from Bloomberg Government with the latest. The state of New York is preparing to seize Donald Trump's assets if he cannot post bond in the civil trial against him. We're going to learn more from Palm Beach County State's Attorney Dave Ehrenberg. He's with us in studio in Washington today with analysis from our signature panel. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are along with you here on the radio, the satellite, and YouTube. We start, as always, with a look at Wall Street. Let's get to Charlie Pellet in for Charlie. John Tucker. Hey, John.
Hey, Joe, how are you? Well, after yesterday's record close, that was the 20th of the year. The major stock averages, right now they're mixed. We have the S&P 500 4 points lower. That's down about 0.1%. 52.36 on the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, 175 points lower. That is down 0.4%. We're at 39,607. And the NASDAQ 100, that's in the green, just barely, up about 4 points, 18,324. Peter Oppenheimer over at Goldman Sachs says, you know what, U.S. markets, they can still do pretty well.
I mean, the outperformance that we've seen of the U.S., which has really been particularly dramatic since the financial crisis, has been entirely based on solid fundamentals. The U.S. economy, but most importantly, profits have simply outgrown those of other regions.
Right now, the worst performing stock in the Dow Jones Industrial Average after its earnings report and its outlook, Nike. Right now, those shares down 7.5%. And then in the S&P 500, best performing stock, the leader, FedEx Corporation. The laggard right now, the number one laggard, that belongs to Lululemon. Lululemon Athletica slumping the most since the start of the pandemic. They reported a slowdown in their U.S. business and lower than expected outlooks. And FedEx plans to buy back $5 billion worth of its shares. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, in for Charlie Pellet. Balance of Power continues. Joe, happy Friday.
And to you, sir. John, great to have you along today, and welcome to the Friday edition of Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. We can tell you, number one, the minibus has passed this collection of spending bills to avoid a government shutdown, passed the House. 286, 134, the number. There are a lot of conservative Republicans upset about this as it makes its way to the Senate now. One of them is Marjorie Taylor Greene. The congresswoman from Georgia has filed a motion to vacate the chair, to fire the Speaker of the House. And she is now talking with reporters outside the Capitol. Let's just put an ear on this quick to hear what she's saying.
That know how to walk in a room and don't get rolled by the deep state and don't get rolled by the Democrats and don't get rolled into doing whatever it takes to maintain that power and position. We need a Speaker of the House that actually represents the people. This is the people's house. This is not Washington, D.C.'s house. This is the people's house, and that matters.
Just to follow up on that, though, you're calling this a pink slip, a warning sign. The bottom line, you want Speaker Johnson out.
I wouldn't have filed a motion to vacate if I didn't. We need a new speaker. This is not personal against Mike Johnson. He's a very good man, and I have respect for him as a person, but he is not doing the job. The proof is in the vote count today. He passed a budget that should have never been brought to the floor, did not represent our conference, and it was passed with the Democrats and without the majority of the majority.
What happens if he moves on Ukraine? What happens if he moves on any aid to Ukraine?
That would also go against what the American people want. Polling shows that it's approximately 70% of the American people do not support continuing a war in Ukraine.
But would that be a triggering event for you?
The motion to vacate's already been filed.
No, but it's already been filed.
He should not bring funding for Ukraine.
Just to clarify, thank you. Sorry, in the back. Thank you.
You are saying you will call for this vote, or you're saying you're still? I know you said no time.
I'm
yet.
saying
You're
that
this
we've
will
started the
happen.
clock to start the process to elect a new speaker.
Have you decided?
I'm giving my conference time. I'm being respectful to my conference, but many members of my conference agree. Even though it's uncomfortable, it's a process none of us want to go through. It has to happen.
So this is kind of a way to avoid you be teaming with Democrats as well by ousting the Speaker of the House, just like Speaker Johnson did in teaming with Democrats to pass the government funding bill.
We have to find a new Speaker of the House. I'm not sure how that vote count would be, and I've heard a lot of Democrats may support him, so I'm not sure how that works out.
If they do that, don't you worry that you're basically pushing him or
All right,
any
this is live sound. If you're with us on YouTube, you can see Marjorie Taylor Greene talking with reporters after filing a motion to vacate, saying, quote, "We need a new Speaker of the House," unquote. There are a couple of very important elements here. We're going to talk to Kate Ackley about this in just a second from Bloomberg Government. She did not take this to the floor to essentially make her filing privileged. That would get the clock rolling and require a vote within 2 legislative days on that motion to vacate. She told reporters earlier that this was more of a warning. So at the moment, we're waiting to see if this is something that will actually get a vote or if this is bluster and maybe a member of Congress trying to get some attention here. The Speaker's focused on governing. He will continue to push conservative legislation that secures our borders, strengthens our national defense, and demonstrates how we grow our majority. If you're just joining us, the House did pass the spending bill, the minibus, including 6 spending bills, technically, to avoid a government shutdown tonight. This is likely going to be a very late night in the Senate. That's what we expect to make all of this happen before we're back here on Monday morning. Kate Ackley is reporting for Bloomberg Government now from Capitol Hill and joins us with a quick beat on what's going on here. Kate, this last hour has been pretty action-packed. Do we actually believe that there will be a vote on a motion to vacate, or is Marjorie Taylor Greene just trying to get on the news today?
Well, she hasn't asked for privilege yet, so there's not going to be a vote, it doesn't sound like right now. And this is quite a way to start this House recess. You know, they're all going to go home to their district work period for 2 weeks, and they're going to be, I'm sure, talking about not just this funding package. It does look like they're going to be averting a government shutdown as long as the Senate is able to move its part of, do its part later today or in the middle of the night or what have you. But this is going to be a big part of what they're talking about when they go back home. I'm sure lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are going to hear about, they're going to get an earful about this latest news.
They will. And I wonder if we're going to be talking about this. Maybe the point is to just have this kind of hanging over Mike Johnson's head and people like us talking about it for the rest of the year. She made a very clear point about Ukraine funding, for instance. Is Marjorie Taylor Greene looking for another shoe to drop here or another move like a Ukraine bill to actually make that filing privileged and take it to the floor?
She did say something along those lines, I think, in the interview that you were just playing a clip from that was live.
Yeah.
That's a line for her, is what she said, if I understood her correctly.
So, Kate, what's going to happen next? We're hearing about, maybe a midnight 12:30 vote in the Senate to actually get this thing done. Everybody gets on airplanes, they head home for the weekend. Is that the most likely scenario?
Well, and it's not just head home for the weekend. It's head home for a 2-week recess. So there's
That's right, of course.
A lot of momentum to get out of town, get this wrapped up as soon as they can. There is that midnight deadline. We'll be now watching the Senate. The House did its vote, and of course, the big story has now become Marjorie Taylor Greene's motion to vacate the speaker chair instead of the vote.
Right.
But now we'll be watching the vote as it goes over to the Senate late into the night, probably.
Amazing. So you're working all night is what you're saying, Kate.
We will have people working all night. That is.
Oh, good. Look at you.
Fact.
See, the senior
That is a
reporters
fact.
get to go to bed at some point, but somebody's got to write this damn thing. Kate, thank you. It's great to have you back from Bloomberg Government in the fray. This has been wild since just the past hour. The bill has passed the House. Marjorie Taylor Greene has filed a motion to vacate. She's already held a news conference, but it's important. She says, I will force a vote, but no time limit. Not making that filing privileged means this could roll on for the rest of the Congress remembering how much we learned about this during Kevin McCarthy's experience in becoming the first speaker to be fired in modern history. Now, the other story that we're watching today, it brings us to the legal challenges of Donald Trump and what may be the financial gains of Donald Trump as soon as Monday, with this SPAC apparently taking place that could mean $3 billion for him. Joining us now, Dave Ehrenberg on a Friday. Diamond Dave is with us. Palm Beach County State's Attorney. It's great to see you, sir. Welcome back to Washington.
Joe, it is great to be back.
I'm always looking at the Zoom to see you. You're sitting right next to me now. What's important to you? A couple of big things are going to happen Monday. I just mentioned one of them. The former president's going to be in court in New York. The Alvin Bragg case that was going to start Monday is being delayed because of recently disclosed evidence. We talked about that. Are we going to get a new trial date Monday?
Yes, and I think it's going to be in April. Judge Merchan wants this to go, and Alvin Bragg came out with a fire brief. It was a takedown of Donald Trump, showing that Trump's all about delays. This is a stall tactic. And of the 170,000 new documents that Trump says, well, we got to take all this time to review, only about 270 pertain to this case. And of the 270, most of them are what you call inculpatory, meaning incriminating. They help the prosecution, not the defense. So Judge Merchan, I think, is not going to delay this any further.
Okay. Bragg had said about 30 days would be appropriate. That's about what we get then.
Yeah, I mean, and
Trump
Judge
wants
Merchan,
90 days. Do they slice that down the middle, or what do you do in a case like that?
Trump actually wants half past never.
Okay, well, yes, of course.
No, I think that after the 30 days expires, which is in, I believe it's either April 15th or 25th, then it's going to go to trial. I am convinced about it.
Okay.
And you can read the tea leaves by Judge Merchan's latest ruling, which was all in favor of the prosecution. And Alvin Bragg reminded Judge Merchan, look, he's done this to you, man. You know, he didn't call him man. You don't call a judge man, but Your Honor, he tried to get you disqualified from the case because he said you're biased.
Right.
And yet this is what he does. He tries to slow everything down. Don't fall prey to it. And I think that Judge Merchan's going to set it.
Amazing. Okay, a 6-week trial is what was estimated. That means a criminal trial will take place before the election. Just a couple of weeks ago, there was a thought that this may never happen.
Right, because there was the thought that there was some bad faith, that the prosecutors withheld documents and then they could be punished for it. But it turns out that it wasn't the state prosecutors, it was the feds. So number one, the state prosecutors are saying, don't call a foul on me when someone else did this. It's not even our team. Right. And number two, it turns out that the feds did not screw up. The feds didn't get these documents until the FBI gave the federal prosecutors the documents in December. And then Trump didn't even request additional documents until mid-January. And so this is not a violation, no harm, no foul. This thing is going to trial.
All right, a separate case we have to delineate here could lead to the seizure of Donald Trump's properties. This is the civil case in New York. It appears he may not be able to post bond, which is a lot of money here, tens of millions of dollars. Unless, of course, this SPAC deal magically falls in his lap on Monday, which is a really interesting wrinkle in this story. But how quickly could that happen? Authorities in New York are actually taking the preemptive steps to begin seizing properties in Westchester County.
Yeah, $464 million is the bond here. That's a surety bond, and no one's loaning that to him. No one's giving that to him.
Right.
Trump could borrow against the SPAC, perhaps, and get the money that way, or he could get a wealthy friend, maybe a foreign actor, to donate, and that's what we have to watch for.
Amazing.
But Monday's a big day. It's not just a New York case. It's the fact that that's the deadline for him to post the bond, or else Letitia James, the AG of New York, gets to start moving ahead to seize his property, to put liens on his property. Now, she's already started to do that, at least put liens in Westchester County, New York. But it's a process. And so that is D-Day for Donald Trump. So
Monday
mark your calendars.
The
Monday.
deadline for the bond and the New York trial, in which he'll be present for that, both happen on the 25th of March.
Right.
How quickly could she start seizing properties, or this is just talk to scare Donald Trump into finding some money?
She's going to issue liens right away. She's
She
going
will.
to encumber it right away. And as far as how long it takes to actually take possession, I don't know. But I do think that it will cause great headaches for Trump. And I think part of the issue is that Trump can't sell the properties right away because there'll be a fire sale at this late date. Plus, I think a lot of his stuff is encumbered. So this will be further encumbered. You know, he said he was the king of debt. Yeah. And so there's a lot of debt here. Now, just because he cannot, and if he cannot post a bond, doesn't mean he can't appeal the judgment. He's going to continue to appeal. It just means, though, that the state can go ahead and start collecting his assets if he doesn't post that bond.
Even as he appeals, though.
If he doesn't post a bond.
Right.
Yeah.
That's incredible. 400, are these properties worth $450 million combined when you add the debts, or we don't know that yet?
When you add the debts, no. I think that's why he can't get the surety bond, because if it were, or if it was liquid, I think they would be more willing, but it hasn't happened.
Why doesn't she take Trump Tower?
I think it's encumbered.
Is that on the list? It's encumbered.
Everything's on the list.
So this is worthless for the state then?
No, not necessarily. Well, this is Bloomberg, so I'm not going to get into fancy,
that's
who
good.
gets to go first financial
not,
conversation.
Absolutely.
But that's for the experts. But I can talk to you from a legal standpoint as a prosecutor that Letitia James already has her eyes on certain properties. I mean, look, Westchester County, she's already moved ahead with the process of putting liens, so he can't just, sell them under her nose.
Right. April 25th is another big date when the Supreme Court hears arguments on the immunity claim, presidential immunity. Based on your judgment at this point, have some time to think about this and knowing what other levers the Trump team could pull, is there a chance that that trial happens before the election if the Supreme Court rules against Donald Trump?
Yeah, you remember the movie Dumb and Dumber? So you're saying I got a chance?
Yes, exactly.
Yes, there's a chance, but the Supreme Court would have to dispose of the issue, and it would be the end of June, and then the judge, or Judge Chuckin, who's a great judge, and she's all business, she would have to cut short the days that she gives Trump to prepare. She originally said 88 more days, but that wouldn't work. So now you have all these new delays. I think she says, I said 88, but that was before the Supreme Court gave you additional delays, so we're going to cut it back to 40 days, and then it could go. And here's the other thing. The Department of Justice told the court in the Mar-a-Lago case that we don't have to abide by the 60-day rule. We can go to trial even 60 days before an election. That 60-day rule that says that the DOJ cannot prosecute someone applies to grand jury proceedings and investigations, not to cases that have already been indicted.
Fascinating. I still want one of those pins. It's much cooler than the congressional pins that you see the members wear. Those, you get the badge is just much cooler.
This is
see that on YouTube.
A bit of a ruse, Joe. This is not my own pin. This is the DA of Plymouth, Massachusetts, Tim Cruz.
How about that?
A Republican,
my own
mind you.
stomping ground. No kidding.
Yeah.
Do you guys share these things? You must have worked on something together.
He gives them out at our meetings,
Really?
our conferences, and because I don't want to have to take one off, so when I just keep this on.
I can't wear that though, right? That's like Herschel Walker with a badge. I'm not a real DA. I can't do that. Great to see you in the nation's capital. Dave Ehrenberg, Palm Beach County State's Attorney, with the way forward for Donald Trump. Remember this conversation on Monday. We're going to be talking a lot about both of these cases and whether properties could be seized next. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. It's Balance of Power, only on Bloomberg.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Kind of mixed right now for the major averages. Wall Street's fear gauge, that's kind of a standout today. The VIX dropping to a 6-week low. The S&P 500 on pace for the biggest weekly gain this year still. Most of it has to do with optimism that the Fed's going to be able to pull off a soft landing in the economy. Among some of the notable movers, FedEx higher after announcing better than expected results. They're also doing a $5 billion stock buyback plan. FedEx shares right now, they are up just about 7.4%. Some of the other standouts, Nike and Lululemon Athletica quoted lower. They are warning about weak sales. And Tesla is sliding. It cut production at its plant in China. Right now, the S&P 500, you have 8 of the 11 major industry groups are lower, 3 are higher. The biggest drag, that is coming from the real estate sector. S&P 500 down about 7 points. That's down 0.1%. We're at 52.34 in the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, 212 points lower. That's down 0.5%. And right now, the NASDAQ 100, 3 points lower. Russell 2000, look at some of the mid-caps right now. That is the biggest loser. That is down 1%. And we rejoin Balance of Power on this Friday afternoon. Joe Matthew, back to you in Washington.
Yes, sir. John Tucker, what a treat on the Friday edition of Balance of Power. Thank you, sir, watching the markets. We'll get back to John a little bit later on this hour to keep you posted on trading today. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington, the fastest show in politics with news from Washington. Number one, they passed the bill in the House. This, of course, is the minibus, even though it's kind of a mega bus here to keep us from shutting down later. 286-134 the vote. A lot of people unhappy because, well, it's Friday or a day that ends in Y. Marjorie Taylor Greene, apparently the most of the unhappy. She's filed a motion to vacate, to fire the Speaker of the House. It has not been privileged. We don't know if this will get a vote anytime soon, but we're back to that conversation. $800 billion for the Pentagon inside this spending package. It is expected to pass the Senate, probably wee hours. We'll keep you posted on that. And inside that $800 billion is a small earmark, $200 million. Pocket change that congressional negotiators put inside their compromise version that I wouldn't know about if it weren't for our Pentagon reporter, Tony Capaccio. It's for low-cost drones, not the super fancy stuff we already have up there. And it has a lot to do with the threats that we're facing. Think about the threat of a swarm of hundreds of low-cost drones against our multi-billion-dollar strike group. And we need to start maybe changing the way we're looking at some of this. So Tony is with us right now to talk about it. Happy Friday, Tony. Great to see you.
Thanks for having me on.
What do you get for $200 million in these sort of, how low cost are we talking here?
This is a jump start. This is the first major production or development money for what's this replicator initiative that Deputy Defense Secretary Kathleen Hicks announced in August.
Mm-hmm.
This is the first money, basically, she's going to be able to spend to scale production, increase production for certain companies.
Yeah.
And this is kind of a victory in a way. In the Byzantine world of budgeting, the Pentagon had asked for a reprogramming or a permission to shift dollars of FY23 dollars because they didn't have an FY24 bill yet. But the Congress, the appropriators, the most important voices, actually gave them new money, more than $200 million, to go forward and multiply, so to speak.
Yes.
We don't know anything though about the spending on it. What it's going to be spent on, the systems, or the technique, or the manufacturing processes, or what companies benefit. We don't know that with certainty yet. The Pentagon's trying to hash all that out right now over the next couple of weeks, and we may learn more.
You say this is to counter Chinese capabilities. What is it about China that's causing us to change?
It's the numeric superiority of their vessels, basically.
Yeah.
And the Taiwan Straits area.
Mm-hmm.
This was, again, unveiled in August. We don't know a lot about it, except she wants thousands of attritable autonomous drones and soldiers in the hands of the Army, Navy, and Air Force personnel by August of 2025. That's a benchmark on the wall for them.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know much about how they would be deployed, where they would be based, the concept of operations, how they would be employed with Army and Air Force and Navy equipment, basically. These are all to be determined. She's got a lot at stake here because it's nebulous to this point, and there's a lot of eyes on it and a lot of interest. China is also watching it very closely to see if they can reverse engineer and spoof a lot of the drones.
Think it's fascinating that we're going low tech kind of. We're facing a lower tech threat, and so these $1 million drones or multi-million-dollar drones aren't the right club for the whole.
Well, I wouldn't. I'm not a golfer, but I know your analogy here. I think they could be the right club for the whole because they're proving out in Ukraine.
Yeah,
we've given them a lot. Switchblade 600s, the anti-tank version. We've given them Switchblade 300s. We've also given them something called the Phoenix Ghost, a classified drone. They haven't talked about it at all, and they also have an unmanned coastal defense system. The Navy still hasn't disclosed what the heck that is, but that's probably destroying Russian ships also.
Fascinating.
So Ukraine is a test bed for what Replicator may be if it passes a lot of testing, a lot of congressional wickets.
Obviously, there's a place for all of this stuff, but when we're shooting down low-cost drones with $1 million cruise missiles, it makes you wonder, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure that's $1 million cruise missiles. If the SM-2 is being used quite a bit, I'm not sure how much I don't think it's $1 million a piece.
Okay.
And F-18s are shooting down drones with less than $1 million missiles. But this has become a cliche that the Pentagon needs to get on top of.
So I'm forwarding the cliche now.
You
for
really
them.
are. You're forwarding it.
Or you can tweet that at me later. See, this is why Tony's here to keep us honest.
The Pentagon, though, needs to explain.
The Pentagon does not need
pushback.
me, is one thing that I'm pretty sure about. But so classified, I keep hearing, secret. That's not the only thing the Pentagon isn't talking to you about. And I want to bring people to a story that you wrote a couple of weeks ago. F-35 capstone test report is stamped classified by the Pentagon. This is the most expensive weapons system in the history of mankind.
Pretty much.
Why did they do the report first?
Well, for one thing, this is a capstone of all the testing that's been done to date on this airplane. The airplane, air in the ground, air in the ground, air in the air, air-to-air testing, and then a very complicated simulation they just finished about 2 months ago. Very complicated simulation that replicates Russian and Chinese air defense threats over the next decade. They've classified the whole thing, not just secret, but special access program, which is called the SAP. That's the key. That's the Uber level of classification, and it's fairly outrageous.
Yeah.
Given that this is the most expensive weapons program on Earth, used by many nations now, many customers.
Yeah.
My sense is that this probably has got a lot of negative connotations in it that will spook the nations that have bought this thing.
Connotations on readiness?
Connotations on the readiness of the aircraft and effectiveness against current and future Russian and Chinese threats.
Wow.
I can understand part of it being classified, or maybe even most, but the executive summary should be out there, and readers should be pushing for the Pentagon.
That's amazing.
This is the most expensive program ever. Many nations have it. The public and those nations have a right to know broadly its foibles and its strengths.
And so the nations who are buying that jet do not get to see inside that report.
That's interesting. I pushed the Pentagon for an answer on that, and the United Kingdom gets it, and the Netherlands get it because they had a major hand in a lot of the open air, the testing, the testing of it. So I got to tell you, if the UK gets it, it'll probably leak to the Daily Mail or one of those, and then you'll have a real problem.
Are you the only one asking about this, or is this a big deal at the Pentagon for the press corps?
I think I'm the only one asking about it.
I had a feeling that was the case. How do you get your hands on something like this, a FOIA or a leak? Don't answer that.
It's a combination of both. It's small ball. You want to get a piece of it first, just a summary of it, and then you FOIA, and then you FOIA a lawsuit. It takes 3 or 4 years, but eventually get out.
There have been a lot of different issues with this airplane going back to its first being put into service. There were issues. Some pilots didn't even want to fly this thing. Remember, with the oxygen system. Now it's software. Now it's actually having the planes ready to be deployed. Lockheed Martin has not been getting that job done.
Yeah.
Where does that stand?
In fairness to them, they have been behind on the most complicated version of the software. It's called TR3 for the software geeks out there. It's a hardware and a software upgrade.
But as a result, we have F-35s that can't fly, right?
Correct. There's an undetermined number of planes sitting undelivered in Lockheed's plant in Fort Worth. They're getting zinged X millions of dollars per plane that they don't have delivered, waiting for this TR3 software to deliver. This is the best software going. And they've had trouble developing it because this is a flying computer that's got like 1 million lines of code. I have no doubt that it would be great. It's great in air-to-air fights, even against a lot of low-tech maybe in the middle tech air defenses, but it's got to prove itself against the highest tech air defenses, and this TR-3 is important. Lockheed is getting zinged. I think it's like $7 million a plane, basically, that they need to deliver, and then they get the money back. But it's a free cash flow issue as well as a national security capability issue.
Why can't they get the software out?
It's immensely complicated.
Yeah.
And they keep falling behind. I mean, they just keep falling behind. About a month ago, they announced they probably won't start deliveries of these things till a little later than mid-year, as opposed to a year ago. It's just complicated stuff when you've got a flying computer to deal with.
Boy, isn't that right? We talk about this stuff going on for months, if not years. At some point, there's going to be a superior airframe where we're talking about a new program, right?
Well, interesting you say that. The Air Force's F-22 was once the premier fighter of all time. Now the Air Force is preparing a next generation air dominance airplane called NGAD, and they've classified the living daylights out of that detail also. So yeah, one begots another. So NGAD will become the new F-22. Someday when your grandkids are covering this, they'll be covering the F-35's replacement.
Amazing, and I'll tell them all about how Tony told us this was coming. I hope Pat Ryder never listens to this show, so he doesn't know what questions you're preparing for the next Pentagon briefing. Tony Capaccio, great to see you. We got the budget cleared, it looks like, so we'll have something new to talk about next week. Come back and see us soon.
Thank you for the invite.
By all means. Back with us from across the Potomac, Tony Capaccio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. We've got the panel together today, and a lot to talk about. If you haven't heard about this yet, Marjorie Taylor Greene with a motion to vacate and a budget that has passed the House. We'll see if we can get through the Senate. Rick and Jeannie are on the way in next. Let's bring you up to date first on world and national news with Amy Morris in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington. Hi, Amy.
Hi, Joe. Let's talk more about that budget. House lawmakers passed it, a $1.2 trillion deal that would keep most federal government agencies open through the end of September. Now, before the vote, Republicans, including Andy Biggs of Arizona, spoke out against it.
A vote for this is a vote for Chinese terrorism because we've had over 30,000 illegal aliens from China come across the border with this border policy.
Republican Representative Andy Biggs of Arizona, and the vote sends the bill to the Senate. Leaders in both parties are trying to get it passed before the deadline, which is midnight tonight. They do have a little bit of leeway to delay the shutdown order on Saturday. Meanwhile, House Republican Marjorie Taylor Greene did file a motion to vacate the Speaker's chair. Greene and other hardline conservatives are upset about that $1.2 trillion price tag. They are pushing to have the House Speaker removed. Donald Trump is returning to the stock market. Investors dumped shares of Digital World Acquisition. That's the blank check firm that's set to merge with Trump's social media company after reports if it got enough shareholder support from the deal. Trump could receive a sizable payout in that process. This comes at a time, remember, Donald Trump is facing his most costly legal battle right now, $454 million judgment in a fraud lawsuit. There is a provision, though, which prevents company insiders from selling newly issued shares for 6 months. We're going to see how that develops. And Russia and China vetoed a U.S.-backed resolution in the UN Security Council that would have said the world body determines the imperative of a sustained ceasefire to protect civilians in Gaza. Global news, 24 hours a day, and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris. This is Bloomberg.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Major stock averages right now, I'm going to call it little changed at this point on this Friday. S&P 500 is still on track for its best weekly gain of 2024. Traders also keeping an eye on some of the comments from a raft of Fed speakers today. Yet Jerome Powell, the Fed chair, his opening remarks during the Fed Listens event that did not include anything with respect to monetary policy. The options market is showing traders ramping up hedges against a further decline in Bitcoin prices as demand for the spot exchange traded funds continues to slow down. And right now, Bitcoin is down just about 4%. Now, what's the backdrop for investors? We put that question a little earlier to Bob Michael at JP Morgan Investment Management.
Companies are more confident about their cash flow and their earnings. So it actually feels that there's more of a stabilization than downside.
Words of caution. Bill Gross, the one-time bond king, warning that investors are in for a bumpy ride as excessive exuberance, that's how he puts it, sweeps the financial markets. Right now, the S&P 500, 8 points lower. That's down about 0.2%. That's 52.32 on the index. Dow Jones Industrial Average, 228 points lower. Yeah, that is down 0.6%. The NASDAQ 100, 7 points lower right now, 18,312. Let's do treasuries for you. The 2-year, the yield down 4 basis points. That's at 458. The 10-year, the benchmark, 5 basis points lower today, right now, at 420. And balance of power continues. Joe Matthew, happy Friday.
Thank you, John Tucker. Happy Friday to you. Welcome to the threshold of the weekend. We'll get back to John for an update on markets a little bit later on this hour. It is balance of power. It's Friday, and boy, the news doesn't stop. You thought you might have a quiet day here. It's actually been quite the adventure. First thing you should know if you're just joining us is the House actually got it done. They passed the bill to avoid a shutdown to fund our government through September. It's on its way to the Senate now, and it was a convincing vote. I guess good for Speaker Mike Johnson. He had Democrats help him out, 286, 134, but not so good for Mike Johnson. Conservative Republicans are very angry. The Freedom Caucus held an angry news conference at 9 o'clock this morning, and then Marjorie Taylor Greene, separately, the gentlewoman from Georgia, filed a motion to vacate, to fire the speaker, saying we need a new Speaker of the House. She did not make the filing privileged, so she can hang this over his head for the rest of this Congress, and did speak with reporters after she did so. Here's Marjorie Taylor Greene.
I do not wish to inflict pain on our conference and to throw the House in chaos. But this is basically a warning, and it's time for us to go through the process, take our time, and find a new Speaker of the House that will stand with Republicans and our Republican majority instead of standing with the Democrats.
All right, let's assemble the panel on this Friday. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are here by the grace of God. Bloomberg Politics contributors, our signature panel. Rick Davis, what in the world is going on in the House? Does Speaker Johnson actually have to worry about this? Just yesterday, people were talking about how he seemed like he was finally galvanizing support in his conference.
Yeah, I don't know how much he was finally galvanizing support. He was sweating getting over 100 Republicans on this bill. He finally got 134. So I'd say that's a comfortable margin. Didn't please Marjorie Taylor Greene very much. And I think she'd be offended that you called her the gentlewoman. There's nothing gentle about Marjorie Taylor Greene. That being said, I'd say she's probably one of the least problems he's got. One, he's got a conference that now is completely rudderless, and the next big thing on his agenda when they return in 2 weeks is going to be Ukraine funding, and he has no seeming solution on that. Secondarily, we'll talk about this in the course of today's program, but he has a massive funding hole between the Republicans in Congress and the Democrats in Congress for re-election, and that is not an easy thing to fix. So, and I'd say, too, maybe the third thing is not only is he upset Marjorie Taylor Greene, but I'm pretty sure the president, Donald Trump, is going to be pretty pissed off that this bill has passed the way it has. He'll echo the Freedom Caucus, and I suspect sometime in the very near future we'll get an all-caps social media post on Truth Social attacking the speaker. So he's got a bunch of problems headed his way.
Wow. Rick Davis with the reality check. Spokesman for Mike Johnson, Raj Shah, says the speaker, quote, always listens to the concerns of members, but is focused on governing, unquote. Jeannie, if Marjorie Taylor Greene really wanted to fire the speaker, why wouldn't she make that filing privilege and get on with it in the next 2 legislative days?
Oh, Joe, are you asking me to look into the mind of Marjorie Taylor Greene? I simply cannot.
Take us with you.
You know, I was so hopeful for just a moment. That minibus was rolling on by, and then Marjorie Taylor Greene got on and threw the driver off, or at least she's trying. You know, I think she would like nothing more than to hang this over the speaker's head. You know, Rick was just mentioning one of the big things on the agenda when they get back from a 2-week recess, because yes, they too need a vacation now, is going to be Ukraine funding. And that's something in those remarks that you were playing in her statement, she referenced. So I'm sure she would like to hear, you know, she would like to speak about that, and she would like to hang it over his head. And I think even more than this bill, a vote to fund Ukraine is going to set the former President Donald Trump into a tizzy. So a lot there to hang over Mike Johnson's head. But I think we need to remember we're in a very different time than we were in October when they had the motion to vacate for McCarthy. And I'm not convinced there is the will, certainly not with Democratic moderates, to do this all over again.
Wow. Boy, there's so much there. Rick, does a Ukraine vote trigger Marjorie Taylor Greene to activate this thing and fire the speaker? Is that what she was setting up today?
You know, I think what she was setting up today is her typical sort of, you know, performance pitch. You know, she needed something to go home to that she could lead the news in. She's extraordinarily good at it. Got us talking about it all day today. So I think that's all this is. She didn't pull the trigger on this because, frankly, she would have had a horrible reaction from the vast majority of the caucus, right? She said, well, I don't want to upset the caucus. Well, then why do it at all? The reality of it is that nobody in this caucus is talking about wanting to expel Johnson from that seat. They have less than 7 months left, potentially, to be the majority party in the House. And the last thing they want to do is spend one more day trying to figure out who the next speaker is going to be. So she has a lot bigger problems trying to implement this than Ukraine policy. She'll have an entire caucus who will wonder, has she lost her mind? Do we really want to be doing this right before an election? And all these guys who are trying to get out and spend more time in their district running for re-election are going to be incensed by this, because the last thing they want to talk about is the third selection of a speaker in the course of 1 year.
Yeah. Jeannie, Tom Suozzi, of course, Democrat, newly elected, re-elected Democrat from New York, who's got the old, what was the George Santos seat, with its own peculiar politics, just said on CNN that he would vote to protect Mike Johnson if a motion to vacate were triggered. Are we on the eve of some sort of power-sharing agreement in which Democrats move to save him?
We could be. And that's what I was mentioning when I talked about moderate Democrats. I mean, forget about the Republicans right now. But in those, 22, 23 days of chaos that we all sat through with the Mike Johnson, Kevin McCarthy motion to vacate last year, you know, one of the big questions was, what would the Democrats do? Would they have some kind of agreement with Republicans to save Kevin McCarthy? And of course, in the end, they didn't do that. But we're in a very different moment right now. We are in an election year. You have Democrats like Tom Suozzi, who you just mentioned, from, you know, he just won a special election in Long Island. He's up again in November. Is he really going to want to talk to this purplish district about the chaos in the House as they go to try to find another speaker? No. And that's why he's saying right now, I would work across the aisle, which is what he's been talking about. I would work across the aisle to save the speaker because, quite frankly, Republicans cannot govern themselves. And Joe, can we just mention the other bit of chaos here in the House? Ken Buck leaves today. That is a
there you go.
majority. So it just is a pile on. But to your point, I do think we see these purplish Democrats are not going to be sticking with any other Democrats in safe seats who want to do what they did last time with Kevin McCarthy. I think in this case, they probably will try to work to save the speaker.
Pretty incredible to see these numbers continue to dwindle. Rick, is this just a media thing? We talk about a power sharing agreement, Hakeem Jeffries coming to the rescue. Would Mike Johnson even want that? Could you be a credible Republican leader having been saved by Democrats?
No, I mean, you'd be a lame duck the minute that vote was taken. In other words, you might be able to serve out the rest of the term in this Congress, to January post-election. Even if there was a Republican majority in 2025, it'd be highly unlikely at that stage that, one, Democrats would want to actually save Johnson again, because he hasn't proven that he could do any bipartisan deals with them anyway, right? That's just to avoid chaos. And two, Republicans don't want him. So within the caucus, they're not even going to push him forward as a candidate, because they'll believe that he's abandoned the Republican caucus, to take league with the Democrats. So no matter what happens, this is highly likely to be the beginning of the end of the Johnson era, and I'm not even sure how to characterize it after today's vote. But we'll have plenty of time between now and January to talk about that.
Well, I guess we will. This is a fundraiser, right? Jeannie, Rick mentioned the disparity in funding between Democrats and Republicans in the House, not unlike what we're seeing between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, the DNC and RNC. Does Hakeem Jeffries take this to the bank?
Yeah, this is just startling, because as polls show, and you mentioned the disparity between Biden and Trump, and of course the disparity we know now between Republicans and Democrats in the House, polls showing one thing, which is that Donald Trump is, ahead in these swing states that we've been looking at with the Bloomberg poll. And yet, when you look at the fundraising advantage Joe Biden has, and now the Democrats in the House, you'd much rather be on the Democratic side of all of this. We have seen with Donald Trump in the past, and we do see it with some of the firebrands, that maybe they can get away with getting free advertising, like the kind that Marjorie Taylor Greene is getting today. But for the entire House, that is much more of a challenge. And so these numbers matter. And this is a big boon for Hakeem Jeffries, who has done a really remarkable job filling the shoes of Nancy Pelosi, obviously with her assistance. And of course, also we have to admit, has the easier job in the minority than being in the majority and trying to be Speaker of the House, especially with this Republican caucus.
Well, the numbers don't lie. The NRCC, the Republican group, raised $8.2 million in February, $45 million cash on hand. Its Democratic counterpart raised $14.5 million the same time and has over $59 million in the bank. You're an expert on fundraising, Rick. Is this Hakeem Jeffries outperforming or Republicans underperforming because they don't have Kevin McCarthy?
Probably a little of both. I think Hakeem Jeffries understands the value of fundraising. He's had the support of Nancy Pelosi to help continue that. She was an unbelievable fundraiser, and now he is. And look at the difference. Kevin McCarthy, who was an outstanding fundraiser for Republicans, will not lift a finger for this crowd inside the House of Representatives. And so a completely untested fundraiser who, would be at the lower quarter of the caucus in funds raised in his history, had to take this over in the middle of all these fights they're having in Congress over spending. And he's had to travel around to 50 cities and try and raise money. And I'd say he's actually doing better than I would have given him credit for, but he's had everything working against him. Bottom line, and Jeannie mentioned Tom Suozzi, he was able to put millions more to work in that special election in Long Island than his Republican counterpart, and that had to matter in the outcome of the election. So when you look at these swing districts, and there are only probably 20 of them, you have to look and say, if they're going to put millions to work in each one of those districts that Republicans don't have, if Democrats outspend each of those races, you got to give them some advantage to that, regardless of what kind of election cycle you're in.
Did Republicans just lose the House today, Jeannie?
You know, I wouldn't say they lost it, but, you know, with a 2-seat margin at this point today, it is going to be very tight. There are not, because of gerrymandering, that many seats that are up for grabs. So that's why this fundraising advantage matters so much, as does the organizational aspect. And, you know, this is one thing we don't talk enough about in American politics. Expertise and experience matters. And that's what Rick was just mentioning with Mike Johnson.
Yeah.
You know, he is untested, but he also does not have the Kevin McCarthy or the Nancy Pelosi fundraising experience, background. That's why when people talk about term limits, I always shudder, because the expertise and experience in governing matters. And we're seeing it today as it impacts campaigns.
Well, you picked quite a day to join us here on Balance of Power with the help of Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis, our panel. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Kaylee Lyons is on the way in next for Hour 2, including our conversation with Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis. The Republican from New York will be with us. A no vote on this budget. There's a motion to vacate the speaker, and our panel will be back with more next hour as we add our TV audience along the way. Stay with us on Balance of Power, only on Bloomberg.
of politics to the world of business. This is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
Speaker Mike Johnson managed to pass a government funding bill, but he may be fired because of it. Welcome to the fastest show in politics. I'm Joe Matthew, alongside Kaylee Lyons in Washington on what has turned out to be not a boring Friday,
Not
as
at
many
all.
expected. Marjorie Taylor Greene, just when you thought it was safe to go back in the water.
Yep, the Congresswoman from Georgia has filed a motion to vacate. The thing is, it hasn't actually been acted upon yet. So now it's just a threat that is hanging over Speaker Mike Johnson's head. And she has indicated that if he were to put Ukraine aid on the floor,
that's the trigger.
That might be actually what triggers a real vote. The question is, Joe, who's going to be with Marjorie Taylor Greene? Is there really a desire among Republicans or Democrats, for that matter, to oust the speaker?
That's right. This you might feel like you've seen this movie before. This is, of course, how things ended for Kevin McCarthy in a very similar circumstance. They did pass a bill today, a minibus, I guess we're still calling it, a package of 6 spending bills that will help us avoid a shutdown as long as the Senate goes along the deadline midnight tonight. And we could still bump into things over the course of this weekend, but it was passed comfortably. And that upset a lot of conservative Republicans who didn't like some of the provisions in this legislation.
Well, more Republicans voted against the bill than for it, which may just spell out the difficulty that Mike Johnson has in managing this Republican conference. So again, no drama shortage here in Washington. Let's see if there's a drama shortage in the trading out there on Wall Street. John Tucker has a check on that for us today. Hey, John.
Well, Kaylee, who doesn't need a breather? The rally in stocks taking something of a breather this Friday. Equities drifting after the advance that saw the S&P 500 climb over 2% since last Friday. And right now we have Tesla leading losses in the mega cap stocks. And like an old sneaker in your gym bag, Nike may need a refresh. The world's largest sportswear retailer warning that sales may take a hit. They're getting a run for their money from some of the sneaker upstarts. In the absence of economic data, traders keeping an eye on comments from a raft of Fed speakers today. Jerome Powell, the chairman, his remarks during a Fed Listens event didn't include any monetary policies, so no changes there. And Michael Barr, who oversees the bank's supervision for the Fed, said he's not seeing any liquidity pressures in the financial sector, at least not yet. Then you have FedEx. That's something of an economic barometer for the U.S., surging on solid earnings. They're also doing a $5 billion buyback plan. Shares of FedEx right now, they are up just about 7.4%. As far as trading today, a little lighter than usual volume, just about 20% below the past month's average. And balance of power continues. Joe and Kaylee meeting you in hour 2. Happy Friday.
Oh, happy Friday indeed. John Tucker up in New York. Thank you. Although it might not be the happiest Friday here in Washington for House Speaker Mike Johnson, because after this threat for a while has been lingering, perhaps now the first steps that could lead to actually ousting him have been taken by Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. It is not a privilege resolution yet, and yet the motion to vacate has been filed, waiting to be acted upon, and potentially any time now. As for the reason why, it appeared because Mike Johnson made the decision to work with Democrats to fund the government. Here was the Congresswoman from Georgia earlier today on the steps of Capitol Hill.
This is a betrayal of the American people. This is a betrayal of Republican voters. And the bill that we were forced to vote on forced Republicans to choose between funding to pay our soldiers and in doing so, funding late-term abortion.
You heard it and saw it live as it happened here on Bloomberg. That was less than an hour ago. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons. Welcome to Bloomberg Radio and TV as we begin our conversation with Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis, the Republican from New York, is with us now live from Capitol Hill, having voted no on that legislation. Before we start talking about the ins and outs of motion to vacate, Congresswoman, why was this not worth your vote today?
You know, I just cannot continue to vote to fund this president's agenda. At the end of the day, we have a crisis at our border. It is Joe Biden's making. He instituted policies using his own authority that has dismantled the border security. And this legislation would give him the money to continue doing what he's doing, which is allowing people to enter into the country. Customs and Border Protection agents are directed to release these people into the interior. They're not being detained or deported. They're being sent to cities like mine, and it has become unsustainable, and it's unsafe, and it's unfair to the people that I represent who are having shelters being put in their districts and seniors being kicked out of residences to make way for migrants.
Okay.
And I'm just not going to fund this.
Well, Congresswoman, is it not then unfair to your constituents as well that a bipartisan border package that the president did agree to that would have tightened many measures at the border was not even given a vote in the House if we're talking about what's unfair here?
It wasn't even given a vote in the Senate, and you should have the same concern about H.R. 2 that we passed out of the House that would actually secure the border. And the Senate won't give it a vote either. So it works both ways here, and I'm happy to work with the Senate to hash something out. And I was hoping that's what our Speaker would have done, is to make sure that there was some border security measures here. Because let's be clear, the President did this using his own authority. He can easily undo it. The reason we don't have a secure border right now is because he has used his discretion to dismantle policies of the previous administration. The thing is, the Senate bill simply gave him some more discretion. But if he's not using the current discretion he has, what makes you think he's actually going to do something to actually solve this problem? And that is why I say, look, we need to reinstate the policies, if not of the previous administration, at least have your Secretary of Homeland Security rescind his direct to the Border Patrol agents. They're being told that if someone is convicted of a crime, that is not grounds to deport them, not on its own. That is wrong, and that is why we see these criminals coming into New York City. They're wreaking havoc, and they've assaulted police officers. We've seen stabbings. We've even seen a murder. And I'm not going to tolerate this anymore until the president decides he is going to actually work with us to really secure the border, or we just get a new president or a senator that would actually take up our legislation or negotiate with us on a package that will truly secure the border. Not what they're saying they're doing, because the Senate bill, again, is discretionary. And if the president's not using his current discretion, what makes you think he's actually going to do something when that bill passes?
Well, you've got a lot of company, Congresswoman. The Speaker failed to get a majority of the majority, which is something that a lot of people were using as an important metric on this vote. Before you joined us, we were talking about a motion to vacate now that's been filed by your colleague from Georgia, Marjorie Taylor Greene. Does Mike Johnson deserve that motion to vacate?
Look, I don't think so. I think the problem is not our Speaker. The problem is the President of the United States and the Senate Majority Leader. You got to remember, the Republicans control 1/3 of the government here. We're outnumbered 2 to 1.
Speaker wanted this bill, though.
It's very difficult. Yeah, he did negotiate it, but the reason why I think we didn't get more of the things we wanted was because he's outnumbered 2 to 1. And the reality is, if people want to see the border being secured, they want energy production to lower costs of food and energy and utilities and inflation, then we need to have somebody who's actually going to pass our legislation over in the Senate, or a president who's willing to work with us on those objectives. The thing is, their goals are very different than ours. They want to allow millions of people to come into the country. They believe that, okay? The anti-energy policies coming out of this administration have driven utility costs in New York and elsewhere to go up significantly. American families can't afford the policies of this president, and we need to fight back. We can't do it unless we have more people either in the Senate, like I said, a president. So I would say that I'm not ready to vacate the speakership again. You remember the disaster that created last time when all of the Democrats sided with a handful of Republicans to get rid of Speaker McCarthy. And I think we had a very weaker hand, by the way, in this negotiation because we lost a lot of leverage because of that. I think Kevin McCarthy would have done a better job negotiating for us. And by the way, Mike Johnson knows that the border security is our #1 issue, and to come back to this conference with this legislation and not have significant policy changes from this administration is a failure.
Well, you have had many colleagues, including Congressman Chip Roy of Texas, suggesting that this House Republican conference is a failure, as you haven't really been able to get many conservative priorities across the finish line. And it does beg the question, with all of that perhaps being true, I'm sure you have an opinion on that, the idea that not much has been able to come out of this Congress. It's worth pointing out there is an election in November. Do you think moves such as this from Marjorie Taylor Greene further threaten the House majority?
I think it's unhelpful. And as I said, it's not that we need a new speaker. We need a new president and a new Senate Majority Leader. And as for, look, Chip Roy, I would say that we have been very successful in passing the legislation that the American people want. Remember, we passed our legislation to ramp up domestic energy production that would lower costs for American families and businesses. The Senate wouldn't take it up. We passed a bill to give parents more say in their children's education and have a right to see the material of the children, what their children are being taught in schools. The Senate wouldn't take it up. We passed a border security measure that was really tough and would do the job that needs to be done. The Senate wouldn't take it up. And so you ask me about, we're not passing legislation that comes out of the Senate. They're not passing our legislation. We're the ones who have the power of the purse. Remember that. So all these fiscal policies that originate in the House, they should be taking up our legislation. I'm happy, again, not everything in that Senate bill is bad, but they didn't do the job of actually securing the border. And so we can negotiate from those starting points and come up with something solid. But really, all of this is moot if the president just did his job and used his discretion, the existing authority he has under sections 1182 and 1225 of Title 8. Again, it's all there. The laws exist. That's why we never had this crisis under any other American president, Republican or Democrat.
We're spending time with Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis here on Bloomberg TV and radio as part of our coverage today on balance of power. The Republican from New York voting against that spending package today. And as we heard from Marjorie Taylor Greene a bit earlier, Congresswoman, it appeared to be the trigger for her would be a vote on Ukraine funding. Now that this budgeting process appears to be drawing to a close, is that the next matter that will be handled? Do you want to see Speaker Mike Johnson bring a Ukraine funding bill to the floor, whether it's tied to Israel funding or as a standalone?
I want the border secured in this country. I want this unsustainable crisis to end.
We're definitely hearing you on that one.
Shelters to be closed. But what I'm
so
saying.
You want to have a border funding bill before you manage the matter of Ukraine?
If we can work something out where we can address both issues, I think that is the route that would most likely be taken and satisfy both parties in both houses. Because what's happening is you see Senator Schumer is so focused on Ukraine only, doesn't want to do anything on the border. House Republicans, yes, we want to support democracies and fighting against oppressors, but we want to secure our border first. So maybe there's an opportunity for us to address these issues together as a matter of a give and take. But for me to support sending more money overseas without securing our border, it is crippling this country. It is really a major problem. And I'm concerned as a New Yorker, we could potentially have a terrorist attack if we continue to have these open borders. We've catched terrorists at the border. Who knows how many are in the country already? There's been over 2 million gotaways that have evaded law enforcement, invaded government officials, and they're in this country. We don't know who they are, where they are, or what their intentions are. And that is what frightens me the most. And I'm not going to be a part of this. And that's why I voted no to fund this agency that won't do its job.
All right, Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis from New York joining us live from Capitol Hill today. Thank you so much for your time and insight. Obviously, Joe, a lot of Republicans are, like her, worried about the border here, and that seems to be guiding a lot of decisions on legislation that does or does not make it through. Again, this funding bill did pass, but more Republicans voted against it than for it. So let's turn now to our political panel. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, Bloomberg Politics contributors, are with us now. So, Rick, I would love to just get your reaction to what we were just hearing from the Congresswoman, the idea that it is, all about the border. It seems to be everything is about the border, be it Ukraine or the status of Mike Johnson as Speaker. And Jeannie, I can ask you this question as well. What should President Biden be doing knowing that Republicans in the House feel this way? She was just talking about him not exercising authority that he has in her mind.
Yeah, it was fascinating to hear this conversation because, of course, and you all asked the question, the Senate bill was described by a conservative editorial board on the Wall Street Journal and others as the toughest border bill in 100 years. And of course, nobody gets everything they want. That includes Republicans like Nicole Malliotakis and others. But if you want everything, you've got to win elections. And right now, Washington, D.C. is 2/3 controlled by Democrats. So I feel like the president, and I know the administration feels like the president gave up an awful lot with that bill. And so to hear now that they're voting against keeping the government open because of that is head scratching, to say the least. And so this is where they are. You know, Donald Trump says, don't go and give President Biden a win. Don't do immigration until I get elected. And they sort of walk in a straight line on that. And I understand they wanted HR too, no question there. But again, Republicans control 1/3 of Washington, D.C. You want that, you got to win elections. And they haven't won enough to get everything they want. And Nicole Malliotakis knows this because she talks frequently about the need to compromise.
Rick Davis, it did not matter what we asked the Congresswoman. The answer was the border. Is this now a single issue House of Representatives?
Well, it may be a single issue election cycle, right? I mean, the reality is when you look at the numbers, especially for most of the districts that are represented by our guys, Republicans in the House, it's number one issue, and not even a close call, right? I mean, they'll beat up on Biden's record on the economy, but the number one thing they're going to go home with this year to campaign on is going to be immigration and the border. And I think what we saw was an interview that is taking place during an election cycle where that's the number one issue. So I suspect you could have interviewed 218 other Republicans today, and you got exactly the same interview.
Well, Rick, you talk about how there are 218 odd Republicans. There were less than half of them that voted yes to this funding package. Even if it's not just Marjorie Taylor Greene, does that not signal a real struggle on the part of Mike Johnson trying to lead this Republican conference?
Yeah, I mean, we have to be very clear. There's really nothing for him to do at this stage. He'll slog through a supplemental that we've all been talking about. There's going to be some pressure to put something on the table there. But otherwise, it's basically done for the year. They're not going to pass a budget in the normal course of this appropriation cycle. They'll kick the can till after the elections, which, you know, wouldn't surprise anybody. That would be typical of any administration. But the reality is that you've got a caucus now where it's every man for himself, every person for himself. And that means they're protecting their own self-interest when it comes to trying to get out of town and campaign. And so the best thing that's going to happen to Washington is these cats all disappear for the next 2 weeks.
What a thought. It's recess time, almost. We'll see if this vote gets done in the Senate tonight. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano up next with more of our panel on the fastest show in politics. This is Bloomberg.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash, red and green on the screen. Apple winding down a long-running project to design and develop its own smartwatch displays. That puts an end to another pricey research and development initiative. You recall they killed the car. Recent weeks, the company has ceased an in-house effort to create screens with micro-LED technology. Well, after yesterday's record close for the S&P 500, the 20th of the year, the S&P 500 right now not doing a whole heck of a lot. Major stock averages are mixed. Some of the individual shares on the move, Lululemon shares, down just about 15%, slumping the most since the start of the pandemic. They reported a slowdown in their U.S. business and lower than expected outlooks. And then you have the bellwether stock that we look to, FedEx, planning to buy back $5 billion of its shares. Adjusted earnings for the third quarter topping Wall Street expectations, and FedEx shares right now up close to 7%. Overall, S&P 500 down 2 points, 5239 in the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average 193 points lower. That's down about 0.5%. The Nasdaq 100 up 35 points. That's up about 0.2%. And volume lighter than usual, Joe and Kaylee. So we've got that Friday feel.
All right, John Tucker in New York, thank you so much. Welcome back to Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm Kaylee Lyons alongside Joe Matthew, where it certainly has been an interesting day in domestic politics. The funding bill that will fund the rest of the government beyond midnight tonight maybe has passed the House. Senate still an open question. Marjorie Taylor Greene has filed a motion to vacate against House Speaker Mike Johnson, although it hasn't been acted upon yet. So certainly no shortage of things to watch domestically, but there's geopolitics in play as well, with Secretary of State Antony Blinken in Israel as he continues to make the pitch this Biden administration is pushing for Israel not to invade Rafah. He spoke in Tel Aviv about this earlier today. Take a listen.
A major military ground operation in Rafah is not the way to do it. It risks killing more civilians. It risks wreaking greater havoc with the provision of humanitarian assistance. It risks further isolating Israel around the world and jeopardizing its long-term security and standing.
As we reassemble our panel now, Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are with us, Bloomberg Politics contributors on what's turned into a very busy Friday, from Capitol Hill to what's happening, of course, now in Tel Aviv and Qatar. Jeannie, I wonder your thoughts on these dual storylines here. Israel promising to invade Rafah, no matter what the U.S. says, even as negotiators gather to talk about a potential ceasefire. How do we get both at once?
You know, I think every time this is Secretary Blinken's 6th trip to the region since the horrors of October 7th, and every time the administration has sent him with a sort of new message. And this one is, of course, in favor of Qatar and Egypt's work on the 6-week ceasefire, release the hostages, Hamas. Israel will respond with the Palestinian prisoners. And most importantly, you get humanitarian aid into Gaza, where the famine that we heard the secretary talk about last night in Cairo has reached, proportions that are really difficult to describe. Food insecurity at 100%, a population 2.2 million, half of whom are children. So, I think the administration is trying to push for this, given what happened in the UN today, given Israel's, unwillingness to agree to a ceasefire, or at least agree to not enter Rafah in the way the administration has talked about. I'm not sure they're going to get there, but they are certainly pushing for this. And that's what Blinken has been trying to do with this 6th visit.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Rick, what more can the Biden administration do then, if anything at all?
Yeah, I think that the Biden administration should be focused on some of the priorities that they are. They are keen to get food aid and relief supplies into Gaza. And we have to always remember that the problem with getting that aid into Gaza is Hamas. It's not the Israelis. It's the Hamas terrorists who are not allowing us to distribute these goods. And when they do come in, they take them and use them for their own means. So, we have to put the burden on the humanitarian effort on Hamas. It's not the the problem that Israel is not supplying us with the capability to do that. And so the U.S. has major efforts underway to continue air supply and building a pier that will bring in food from the sea. So I think these are things that the Biden administration can really focus on. But look, Bibi Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, told us when this initiative started and the tanks rolled into Gaza that he was going to get rid of Hamas. And anybody who didn't believe him at that time should believe him now. He has told Blinken and the president that that job's not finished and he can't finish it without going into Rafah. So he's going into Rafah. And it's a risk for Israel. They'll have to deal with what do they do while they're there. And they are risking blood and treasure in the process of doing it. But it's not a surprise. This is exactly the plan that Israel told us they were going to execute on shortly after the terrorists kill all these people in Israel after October 7th.
Well, I'll tell you what, we're helping them pay for it, Jeannie. I don't see anybody talking about this, but inside this funding bill that just passed the House and is expected to pass the Senate later will avoid a government shutdown, but it will also include $3.8 billion in funding for Israel, 3.3 of which is in foreign military financing over the next 30 days. I don't see a headline like that about Ukraine in here.
That's right, because of course there is none. And, one thing I think we should keep a watch on is that as we move to the Democratic National Convention this summer, if there is not a substantial turnabout in terms of the United States vis-a-vis what's going on in Israel and Gaza, it will be a very, very tense convention because the number of young people and people on the Democratic side who are protesting U.S. support of the kind you just talked about, Joe, is really dramatic. And, in the statement Donald Trump made, for instance, the other day, he mentioned this, not ever seeing anything like this. So there is a deep divide in the Democratic Party on this, rather. And we thought 1968 in Chicago was bad. It will be worse this year, I predict, if this isn't addressed by the Biden administration. So it's a domestic political issue for Democrats for sure.
Well, Jeannie, on that point, Mike Johnson is talking about inviting Bibi Netanyahu to speak to a joint session of Congress. Should Democrats go along with that?
I thought Catherine Clark's response to that was right on point. Invite who you want. You are the speaker. You are in charge. But do the work of the people. Put the federal bill up, the supplemental foreign aid bill up, which includes Israel, particularly the humanitarian portion, which includes Ukraine. Do the business of the people. Get that vote done. And I think that's the response Democrats should have to a potential visit or at least a speech by Benjamin Netanyahu in the House.
All right, Jeannie and Rick, we appreciate you and your insights on so many stories today. Our signature panel, Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, we thank you for joining. As we add the voice now of Denver Riggleman, the former congressman, is with us here. Of course, a former Republican congressman who joins us from time to time with a lot of news in the air today that we want to talk about. Denver, thank you for joining. There's a motion to vacate now filed against the speaker who just somehow got a funding bill passed with the help of Democrats. It came courtesy of Marjorie Taylor Greene. Does he deserve it?
Well, I mean, my goodness, this is the real March Madness, isn't it? It's pretty nuts, performative politics. But based on a significant, I would say, portion of the membership of the GOP, they certainly think he deserves it because he sold out, to the, in quotes, I'll put this in air quotes, the globalist Democrats. So, yeah, I think that's what we have right now. And with this performative, I would say I'll use a better word, bat crappery that you're seeing right now. I think it's just sort of amazing to me that she's still getting the type of media attention she's getting with these kind of ridiculous things like motions to vacate.
Well, we've heard from even Republicans who were involved in the motion to vacate against Kevin McCarthy, specifically the individual who brought it, the congressman from Florida, Matt Gaetz, suggested that he wouldn't want to support a motion to vacate because there was a likelihood that the House could elect a Democratic speaker, considering we're working with a very thin Republican majority here. Even if this were to work, if Marjorie Taylor Greene were to act on it and kick Johnson out, what would follow, Denver?
Chaos, the same thing that's followed in the 118th Congress since the beginning.
She said today she doesn't want chaos.
Well, I mean, what Marjorie Taylor Greene says and what she does are usually opposite things. And if you look at what happened today, right, you have somebody who's self-identified as a Christian nationalist going after Mike Johnson, who believes he's been called to be in that position, by God, almost have their own God on God violence here. Chaos is the only thing that gets Marjorie Taylor Greene media clicks. And if you looked at the pictures of her on the steps today, right, she was surrounded by media based on her motion to vacate. This is the performative crap that you're seeing right now. I think a preschool is more sophisticated than Congress right now. And I think that's the issue that you have is there's unserious people there. So what she says and what she does are two opposite things. And if you go back in her past, that's what she does. She's just there to get as many clicks as possible, to be performative, and other people follow along because it helps with their fundraising and helps with their polling, and it could help in their elections coming up in this cycle.
So she has no intention of firing the Speaker of the House then, if I'm reading you right, Denver. And if that's the case, couldn't she end up strengthening Mike Johnson's hand if he appears to have survived this effort from Marjorie Taylor Greene and MAGA Inc.?
Marjorie Taylor Greene doesn't think that far ahead. Right now, she's auditioning to be in the Trump cabinet or be a Trump appointee. Sure. So when you look at the strategy of these individuals, it's so naked and so transparent. They're out there trying to actually, Mar-a-Lago is where they're getting their marching orders. So it's interesting the chaos that's being churned up right now. But it could be that Marjorie Taylor Greene is just a flank, on the Trump type of, I would say, campaigning in order to push all these crazy narratives out there. And, what she's doing, though, is she is setting the stage. Remember, with McCarthy, this is sort of how it started happening, too, right? You have the first little poke that seems crazy, but it could be a way that they want to go. So, again, I think Mike Johnson needs to be careful. And when you look at the passing of the budget today, they barely got over the 2/3. You still see, I think, and you can fact check me, I think it was 134 Republicans voted against it. Does that sound correct? That's still a significant portion of the Republican conference. So again, it's going to be really interesting to see where this craziness ends up over the next few months as the presidential campaign heats up.
112 Republicans voted against, but that is more than the 101 Republicans that voted for. To your point, Denver, the Hastert rule did not work in this case. It did not pass the majority of the majority. You were talking, though, about Donald Trump, how Marjorie Taylor Greene potentially would want to work in a second Trump administration, but we also know that former President Trump and Speaker Johnson are close and talk frequently. Would Donald Trump allow him to be ousted?
Well, he didn't have a big issue with McCarthy being ousted. I think Trump only cares about what happens for him in his presidential race. He's not particularly close to Mike Johnson. If you noticed, Trump uses loyalty like a stick, right? The loyalty only goes one way. So I would humbly submit, and I know both of you have your fingers on the pulse. I love talking to both of you. I would humbly submit that Donald Trump will do anything he can to ensure that he stays in the news, that his biggest supporter stays in the news. But as far as, I would say extending loyalty to anybody, Donald Trump hasn't done it, and he's not about to start now. So Mike Johnson is expendable as anybody else.
Ken Buck is out today. Denver, we're down to 2 seats for Mike Johnson. People are hearing about the motion to vacate. I figure we'll fight and argue all summer throughout campaign season. Can we say that Republicans lost the House majority today?
Darn close to it. I mean, you still have a couple sane Republicans left in there. I mean, they're dwindling. But when you see things that happen today, when you see Marjorie Taylor Greene, when you see very important votes that really define what America needs to be, I think today that the Republicans are really on the ropes. And I'm really wondering about the 2024 elections. I'm wondering about the polling, what they're seeing in their crosstabs, what their base is expecting them to say. But I would say right now that the Republicans are going to have a tough time passing any type of agenda that pushes what Trump wants them to push. And there you go. Right now you're looking at what is going to happen to the GOP conference now. Ken Buck leaving, I think, is a great thing. It also put Lauren Boebert, it leveraged her also. So now things are getting a little nutty. And I really think in 2024, you're going to see a real shift. And I think you're going to see the Democrats take back the House. And I don't think it's going to be by 3 or 4 votes. I think they're going to do okay there at this point. But, trying to tell the future in politics is very difficult. But again, I think right now they've effectively lost the ability to do much in Congress with any type of GOP agenda.
Well, on the subject of Democrats, we know that they did not act in any form to protect Speaker McCarthy when he was being ousted. Would you hope that they would act differently in the case of Mike Johnson? Should they, considering all of the political implications here you were just talking about?
You know, if you're looking at it, there's two ways here, right? If you're looking at it completely politically, there's no reason they should. You know, the Republicans made their bed with this insanity. You know, why would Democrats pull them out of their, you know, their flat spin, right? They went ahead and they killed both engines on their fighter jet. Now they're in a flat spin. You know, why should the Democrats help them eject? You know, on the other side, though, if you keep having this churn in speakers, even before the 2024 election, it would be quite magnanimous of the Democrats to help Mike Johnson, and indeed a few might. I still think, though, as far as politically and the presidential election coming in 2024, I think the Democrats would have a tough time actually supporting any speaker outside of a Democrat. What would be interesting is what is the flip? I think Matt Gaetz is sort of full of crap anytime he talks. You know, he's more like the human embodiment of a wet fart. But I do believe, right, that there could be some kind of possibility of moderates maybe coming up for a Democratic speaker. But again, it's politics, it's Congress, it's the 118th, maybe the craziest Congress we've had in decades. I just don't see the Democrats crossing the line and helping any Republican speaker at this point.
Okay, having a little trouble with that one, Congressman. Let me just ask you lastly, will this pass the Senate tonight?
I think it will. You know, again, it's hard to tell the future, but I think this passes the Senate, and I think the budget passes tonight.
All right, Denver wriggled. Let's walk him out. The former congressman from an undisclosed location outside the blast radius in Virginia. We thank you for being with us, as always. I just need to straighten this out a little bit now, Kaylee. As we join you live from Washington on a day of days, this is the kind of reaction you get when things like this happen.
Always colorful.
Motion to vacate. Good Lord. We're going to talk to David Weston next. Is that the plan? Yeah.
It is, but first we're going to talk to John Tucker. He's got to check on the markets on Monday.
Left me speechless. Let's start off, Joe and Kaylee, with Stellantis cutting about 400 white-collar jobs in the U.S. The maker of Jeep and Ram vehicles working to shift its product lineup toward electric cars. Now, the decision here affects about 2% of the automaker's engineering, technology, and software staff in the U.S., and these cuts take effect the end of this month. Activist investor Nelson Peltz has questioned Walt Disney's decision to pursue female and black-led casting on certain movies as he enters the final stretch of his fight for a board seat at the entertainment giant. In an interview with the Financial Times, the billionaire says moviegoers want to be entertained and not get a message. We near the end of the week with the major stock averages mixed a little change, I'll call it. In the S&P 500, 8 of the 11 major industry groups are lower. Real estate, the biggest drag. Information technology, communication services, they're in the lead. Best performing stock in the S&P 500, FedEx right now. Those shares, they are up about 7%. Worst performing stock of the S&P 500, Lululemon Athletica, that is down 15%. Overall, S&P 500 down a point. The Dow, 198 points lower. And the NASDAQ 100 right now is up 38 points. No need for the mute button here. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash, Joe and Kaylee. Entertaining, at least.
John Tucker, I'm glad you could be part of that moment here only on Bloomberg TV and radio. You never know what you're going to get here when the news is flying, and it has been today. A bill has passed the House of Representatives to fund the government past midnight tonight, and it spawned a motion to vacate by Marjorie Taylor Greene, which, if you were just with us, has generated some interesting reactions around the Washington area here today. And this is just in the last 2 hours, Kaylee Lines, on what's been another very busy week. We've had a Fed meeting this week. We've had a president on the campaign trail. And now this. Look, there were a lot of people predicting a government shutdown. It appears we are actually going to avoid one.
Well, we'll see. The Senate still has to pass this thing. So if it happens, it may just be very short in the wee hours of Saturday
Weekend
morning.
Shutdown.
And no one would really feel it until Monday anyway. So yes, in all likelihood, this will be a shutdown that no one actually feels. But it is in the Senate's hands now. You make up a good point, though, Joe, which is that it's been a very busy week, not just in terms of fiscal policy, but monetary policy as well. As we had a Federal Reserve decision, which, not surprisingly, brought no change in interest rates, but did bring a signal that even though they think inflation's going to be higher than they expected, they still might cut rates 3 times this year if you're looking at the dot plot. And that is where we begin now with David Weston, of course, our colleague and host of Wall Street Week. So, David, I'm sure you are talking extensively about the Fed this week, and including, I imagine, to the former Treasury Secretary, Larry Summers.
You got it, Kayla, exactly. We did talk to Larry Summers about that. And he said, look, it's nice that things are looking pretty good, but he thinks that there's more risk on the downside than the upside. And he actually said it's bizarre what the Fed is trying to say about the long-term neutral rate, that to say that it's around 2.5 or 2.6, given what's going on. And so he thinks they're setting themselves up. And the practical effect of that is, if in fact it's more like, as he said, it starts with a 4, not with a 2, that means that the rates they've got in place right now are not that restrictive, contrary to what Chair Powell said in that news conference, where he said, oh no, we're quite restrictive right now.
So what did we learn this week, David, that actually changed anything? There was a lot of consternation over the dot plot on the vote and the way thing, but in the end, nothing really changed, and the market loved that, right?
Well, the market loved it because the chairman did not step away from 3 rate cuts this year. If you look at a little bit through the dot plots, I mean, they're a little less sure of it than they were, I guess is the way I would put it. They moved a little bit, but I think given those 2 inflation readings, there was concern that they might actually cut back from 3 to 2 or even to 1, as some economists think that they will do eventually. But he didn't. He stepped right up and said, no, we believe we're staying the course and we're not going to let 2 readings get in the way. So and as you say, Joe, the markets loved it. I think it probably is understating to say they loved it. They're off to the races again. You know, I'm not sure how much we really learned, other than the Fed is not inclined to vary very much very quickly. They're sort of sticking to their knitting, I would say.
And he indeed talked about sticking to the knitting when he was asked a question in the press conference about the many letters he has gotten from members of Congress calling on him to cut rates or do one thing with policy. And he basically said, you know, we read them all respectfully, but at the end of the day, we're going to do what we do, which I thought was an interesting moment, of course, observing it from here in Washington. And of course, a lot of what Powell's mandate involves, including inflation, but the labor market as well, does have implications for policy, including on immigration, because that has an impact on growth. It has an impact on the labor market. And I know that was a subject you were digging into as well this week with Brian Deese, who, of course, used to serve in the administration.
Yeah, exactly. He was the director of the National Economic Council under President Biden. And it's not just Brian. Other people as well have said immigration really is a significant factor in the growth we're seeing right now, because we have more workers. And when you have more workers, then in fact, that is deflationary rather than inflationary, and it spurs growth. So we talked to Brian about a variety of things, but one of the things we talked about is what is the biggest differences between a Biden 2.0 and a Trump 2.0? And he indeed did say he thinks immigration and legal immigration, specifically, listen for this, legal immigration. This is what Brian Deese had to say on immigration.
I think the big difference in what I worry about is with respect to the legal immigration system. So one of the significant things we've seen over the past couple of years, the reason why we've seen significant increases in labor supply and labor force participation, it's legal immigration has come back after COVID and after the Trump administration, as well as more women coming into the workforce. That process of legal immigration that is now normalized, and the Biden administration prioritized, for example, working down visa backlogs and trying to get to a more normal system. I think under a Trump administration, you could expect that to revert. And I think in addition to that being bad for innovation and bad for broader economic growth, it could also be quite inflationary in the short term, because what you're doing is constricting labor supply at a moment where we need more workers in the United States. Our legal immigration system has been an engine for growth for decades, for a long time. I think that there would be a big difference on that front, because I think you're right. With respect to the southern border, it will need to be addressed. It'll need to be addressed in a realistic but aggressive way.
Yeah, as he says, and I think we all agree, they're going to have to do something with that southern border. But I had not heard much discussion about the legal immigration, how that's gone up under President Biden. It had gone down substantially, as you know, under President Trump. And economists will tell you that is not good for the economy, for the reasons Brian Deese said, both for inflationary reasons and also for overall productivity.
You know, we talk to a lot of Republican lawmakers about this, David, as you do as well, and they always say, yes, that's an important conversation, and we need to have it, but only after we secure the border. Remember when Donald Trump, when he was first running in 2016, used to talk about the golden door? We're going to build a big, beautiful wall, he said, but it will have a golden door, and that was for legal immigration in the way that he termed that. He's never followed up on that, has he?
Boy, I'm so glad you raised that, because it's easy to forget that he did talk about an immigration policy that said, yes, we will let people in, but we want to make sure they're the, I would say, right people. That is to say, with the right set of skills, the people who really will go into some of the high-tech areas, other things of innovation that will really help our economy. And he did embrace that, but I don't think it went anywhere, did it, Joe and Kaylee? I don't remember it going anywhere.
No.
And I think a lot of
No,
economists
and it's really
would say
not
that
part
would
of
be
the
smart.
conversation now.
Yeah,
absolutely. If you talk to the Chamber of Commerce or anyone who's concerned about the labor force and labor shortage, David, they're asking for this to be had. But my God, we can hardly get a funding bill passed without border security in Washington. So I'm not sure we're going to get there tomorrow.
Yeah, well, you're not going to get there tomorrow, but I was going to give the two of you credit for getting something done today. Congratulations. I mean, you kept the speaker and you got a bill through. I mean, that's a big day for you guys.
Well, don't jinx it now. For now.
Just got the pesky Senate to deal with, right? I mean, you can take care of that.
That's true.
Exactly. We'll see what they can accomplish by midnight tonight. And of course, before that, about 6 hours before, at 6 p.m. Eastern, is when Wall Street Week will air. So you've got Brian Deese, you've got Larry Summers. What else is coming up on the program this evening, David?
Kristen Roth de Clark from Barclays, who is in charge of tech investment banking there. And you guessed it, we're going to be talking about Reddit. And we're talking about tech IPOs. You know, there's been a real dearth of tech IPOs, and she thinks maybe they're really coming back. In fact, she thinks in 2025, not 2024, we could have 40 or 50, she says, tech IPOs. They're monitoring about 200 companies. So we talked to her about why it's been down so low and why it's coming back. And by the way, here's a hint. AI is an important factor. You might have guessed that.
Yes, it always comes down to AI these days, doesn't it? David Weston, host of Wall Street Week, looking forward to tonight's program. Thank you so much for joining us on Bloomberg Television and Radio, where we often like to highlight the daily big take story. You can get it here at Bloomberg on the terminal, you can get it online, and you can hear it talked about on radio and TV. That's what we'd like to do now. Is today's big take covers a subject pertinent to the election, because apparently a lot of voters in swing states care a lot about it, and it's the fentanyl crisis. It's killed more than 270,000 or so Americans, and it's something that may make a difference when voters head to the polls come November. The author of this week's Big Take story is Riley Griffin. She is a healthcare reporter for us here at Bloomberg, and she's joining us now in our Washington, D.C. studio. So, Riley, obviously an immensely important topic, something we have heard come up repeatedly on the campaign trail, but the polling that Bloomberg has done with Morning Consult really highlights the extent to which this is on the minds of voters, even tops other issues we talk a lot about, like abortion.
Which is quite stunning. I think it's an underappreciated election issue, especially in swing states. We found that 8 in 10 swing state voters specifically said that this was a very important or somewhat important issue to them going into the election in terms of deciding who to vote for. And that was bigger than the numbers we saw for abortion, for the wars in Ukraine and Gaza, for labor. Typical subjects that you think would top that, but no, the opioid epidemic has impacted every corner of this nation, and we're really seeing that play out in swing states too.
It's a festering topic. I was covering the opioid crisis 10 years before COVID.
Yeah.
And that's what took everyone's eye off the ball. But the fact of the matter is the problem only got worse during the pandemic, didn't it?
Acutely worse. And that 270,000 figure that you pointed to, that is in the time period just before the COVID pandemic till now. So it is a near-term issue, and it is one that we're seeing especially pertinent. I heard you talk about border security issues. Yeah. It's become conflated with border security, with immigration, with China, with crime. So it is kind of an all-encompassing issues for swing state voters.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to ask, because on the one hand, a lot of the actual chemical material is coming from China, and then it comes theoretically over the border from Mexico once it's actually turned into these drugs that people in the U.S. are accessing. So where are we seeing the blame actually cast? Is it just an all of the above answer?
So U.S. voters in swing states say that they first and foremost blame American drug users, which is a sombering piece of data. Then they blame Mexican cartels. The DEA actually says that the entity that traffics most often the drug across the border is American citizens in U.S. vehicles through ports of entry. So often when this is conflated with immigration, that's not quite accurate. It is an issue of border security, but it is not immigrants who are bringing fentanyl across the border.
That's incredibly important. You know how many lawmakers come on this program and make that claim that we need to close the border now to stop illegal immigrants from bringing fentanyl into suburban neighborhoods across the country? You're saying that's patently false.
patently false, and you can cite law enforcement. Law enforcement is on the front line. One thing that Biden has proposed, including in the State of the Union mentioning this, is adding detection devices across the borders to better scan vehicles for fentanyl. So that is one of the solutions that has come up again as a contention between Republicans and Democrats as we talk about border security bill.
Well, because as we know with so many things, something that is proposed by the president isn't necessarily entirely in the control of the president. A lot of things do need congressional approval, and that border deal he agreed to that may very well have tried to address some of this never went anywhere in the Senate or in the House. Is there anything that the administration can do now to address this, powers that they don't need Congress to grant?
One thing they've tried to do is encourage uptake of naloxone, the opioid overdose reversal agent. But that is not something that is necessarily bipartisan in its support. We're seeing really that Democrats support these public health measures, treatment, and Republicans support border security and limits on immigration. So it is a partisan issue like any other in Washington, even though this is an epidemic that affects every kind of person in every corner of the nation.
It was just in January the U.S. agreed to start dealing with this matter and trying to tackle the matter of fentanyl trafficking with China.
Yes.
Do we have any sense of where that's going, and has it been a help?
Yeah, so you're referring to Biden and President Xi in their meeting, which was highly anticipated, and the big win for Biden of that meeting. It's going to be a long time before we see the actual impact of that on the supply chain, and it's something that we're watching really closely. But it's going to take time to tell whether the administration is holding them to that promise to tackle the precursor chemicals.
It's really such an important subject. And you said at the beginning here the idea that this is showing up in our polling of swing state voters, but really this is something that touches every corner of the country. Where within the country demographically is this being felt most acutely, or does it not discriminate in that way? It's just pervasive.
We're seeing increases across the United States, so anywhere from Alaska to Arizona to other parts of the country. So it's really everywhere. But one thing I would note is the politics of this are going to be especially important in border states, where we are seeing impact from fentanyl, but also a divisive politics. And I will note that 1/3 of the voters we polled don't think Trump or Biden will be able to address the crisis.
Well, that's interesting. So this doesn't favor one candidate over the other?
Not right now. I think we'll see the immigration rhetoric, whether or not that continues to take hold in favor of Republicans.
You wonder if it's who appears tougher on the border or who appears tougher on China will resonate the most with this issue.
And per our polling, it's the border. It's the border in Mexico more so than China.
Well, perhaps that's just what's closer to home and is being felt most immediately rather than going all the way down the supply chain. It's a really, really fascinating and important read. Riley Griffin, Bloomberg healthcare reporter and author of today's Big Take, 270,000 deaths put fentanyl crisis at the heart of the U.S. vote. Check it out on the terminal or online. And I'm sure this is something, Joe, that we're going to be hearing much more about as this election cycle goes on.
Certainly, as long as the border remains an issue. We started this hour talking with Nicole Malliotakis, who steered us to the border on every question we asked. And that's a component of pretty much all of those answers, isn't it?
Yep.
Riley, thank you for being with us here on Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons in Washington as we steer our attention to New York. Carol and Tim standing by as we prepare for Bloomberg Business Week. Hey, Carol, what's coming up today?
Yeah, there's a lot on our plate as we get ready to wrap what's been, as you know, Joe, a very, very busy week. But we are looking at a market that's been bouncing around, but we're looking at maybe having our best week in 2024. So amid all the volatility, Tim, nonetheless, we could kind of go out with a bang, and we'll see if we get another record here on the S&P and the NASDAQ 100.
Plus, you guys have seen what's happening with the world's largest sportswear retailer today. Nike warning, sending tremors throughout the sector. Lulu shares also lower today. We're going to take a look at retail overall and really just see how consumers are doing.
And guys, for a great take on the economy, we're going to check in with the CEO of PNC Financial Services Group. They're home to PNC Bank. We know a year ago we were so focused on the regionals. We'd already seen the troubles with Silicon Valley Bank and its collapse. So we're going to see what he has to say about the environment, the lending environment, what it tells us kind of about the broader economic story. So a lot coming your way on this Friday.
All right, Carol, hard to believe that that was just a year ago, because in some sense it feels like that was a couple months ago or several years ago, and it just kind of it would depend on what time of day you ask me, because even this week has felt long. So.
I know these guys have a Reddit hangover after yesterday. Just imagine what they're going through. Carol and Tim, thank you. As always, we look forward to listening every day here on Bloomberg TV and watching on the radio, or maybe the opposite. It's been
on
a
YouTube,
long one here.
Yes, you can find us everywhere.
With apologies to Denver Riggleman, I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons. I'll meet you at 5, only here on Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio.
And a very good afternoon, everybody, live on Bloomberg Radio, television, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals. I'm Carol Masser, along with Tim Stenovec, on this Friday, March 22nd, 2024. Of course, keeping an eye on the markets, whether or not we can see this rally continue. It's been quite a week, Tim.
Yeah, it certainly has. The rally's taken a little bit of a pause. The market, though, we should note, is headed for its best week of the year. This all after we heard from Fed Chair Jay Powell earlier this week, and investors still optimistic that a Fed rate cut possibly could come as soon as June.
Yeah, there's certainly some optimism over that. Having said that, we've got a great guest coming up, specifically who did a great call last year in terms of the equity play. Ryan Dietrich's going to be back with us. Tell us what he thinks about the environment, what it means, what the rally means, and kind of where we go from here. So that is certainly front and center for us.
And also taking a look right now at shares of Nike, down 5.8% as we speak. The world's largest sportswear retailer, a warning sending tremors through the sector. A look at the group and how consumers are doing.
Tim, I want to mention some headlines just crossing the Bloomberg terminal. Kate, Princess of Wales, saying that in January she had some abdominal surgery that it found cancer. The UK's Kate Middleton saying she is having chemotherapy at this point, preventive chemotherapy. But again, that surgery, which we all have heard about, right? She has not really been seen in public as of recently, but before that, since around Christmas time. But Kate, Princess of Wales, saying January surgery found cancer. We do have a statement from the palace, a transcript of a video message from Catherine, the Princess of Wales, and it says, I wanted to take this opportunity to say thank you personally for all the wonderful messages of support and your understanding whilst I have been recovering from surgery. It has been an incredibly tough couple of months for our entire family. I've had a fantastic medical team who has taken great care of me, for which I am so grateful. We have this message, and we want to play it for everyone who is watching and listening right now on Bloomberg. Let's take it.
As is the love, support, and kindness that has been shown by so many of you. It means so much to us both. We hope that you'll understand that as a family, we now need some time, space, and privacy while I complete my treatment. My work has always brought me a deep sense of joy, and I look forward to being back when I'm able. But for now, I must focus on making a full recovery. At this time, I'm also thinking of all those whose lives have been affected by cancer. For everyone facing this disease, in whatever form, please do not lose faith or hope. You are not alone.
All right, everybody, you've been listening to Kate, Princess of Wales, a video, obviously, talking about that she is dealing with cancer and that her January surgery specifically found cancer. Our understanding is she is going with preventive chemotherapy at this point. I will say the transcript is a little bit longer, but that is a little bit of what she had to say.
For more, let's bring in two of our colleagues in London, Bloomberg News anchors, Caroline Hepker joining us from London, as well as Guy Johnson, Bloomberg TV host, who joins us from London. Caroline, I do want to start with you and just give us your response after so many weeks of speculation about where Kate has been. Your thoughts right now.
Good evening from London. At 6 o'clock tonight on a Friday evening, I think this will come as an absolute shock to the nation. It's only a few weeks ago that we found out about King Charles's treatment for cancer. And now this really devastating news from Catherine, the Princess of Wales, who is 42 years old. She talked in that video message about the reason that it took her so long to talk to the public about this, because she had to communicate the news to her three young children, George, Charlotte and Louis. I think this will be an absolute bombshell to Britain. She, along with her husband, of course, the Prince of Wales, have been really the standard bearers for the royal family in the UK these last few months. And we knew that Catherine had undergone surgery in January, that she wasn't due to return to official royal duties until after Easter. In the last few days, we had heard that she was easing back into her role, but this is a much more serious diagnosis than I think anybody had expected. Perhaps there were some inklings of this, however, given the defence that, for example, the opposition leader, Sir Keir Starmer, talked about this week, also the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, trying to press home the message, given the intense speculation that the Princess of Wales has been under in the last few weeks. Both of those political, religious leaders were trying to insist on the need for her privacy and for her to be left alone, and her family.
Caroline, I want to go back to that statement. As you said, there was more than what we saw and heard in that video segment. As you said, she said in January she underwent major abdominal surgery in London, and at the time it was thought that her condition was non-cancerous, she says. Surgery was successful. However, tests after that operation found cancer had been present, and that her medical team advised that she should undergo a course of preventative chemotherapy. She says she's now in the early stages of that treatment. Guy Johnson, Bloomberg News anchor over there in London as well. I mean, Guy, this is something that, has been a lot of speculation. A lot has been written, some unkind over the last few months. But obviously, the royal family, you folks know better than most the importance and the high profile of them, that when they are out of sight, it brings up many, many questions.
The royal family does have a history of not communicating very much information in these kinds of situations, and as a result of which, speculation that Caroline referenced just a moment ago and you've talked about has been incredibly intense. The unfortunate situation here is that this goes hand in hand as well with a cancer diagnosis that we've received for the King. And there has been much speculation over the last few weeks about an acceleration of a handover of power between the generations. This will only further complicate that process and make that more difficult. There was an expectation that maybe the royal family was in the process of bringing William and Catherine up to speed, the Princess and Princess of Wales, so that they could maybe manage more and more of the heavy duties that would be required of them. The fact that we now have this news regarding the Princess of Wales will further complicate that process and make that significantly more difficult. We now have two generations dealing with this condition, and as a result of which, I think it'll throw up a range of questions about what happens next with the royal family. It is clear that this has been something the royal family has been very keen to manage. It has not communicated particularly clearly. It's been wanting to do that, obviously behind closed doors. Whether that was a decision by Catherine or by others remains unclear at this point in time. But it comes at a very difficult time for the royal family in terms of where ultimately authority is going to lie and how the generations are going to work together.
Well, Caroline, I do want to talk a little bit about that communication, and I'm wondering if you could share with us the expectation of what people, quote unquote, deserve to know, because health is a very private thing for every single person out there, regardless of whether or not they're a public figure or they live a private life. What is the expectation of actually getting updates from her and understanding more about her diagnosis? This, after all, is a health matter, and health matters are private.
Yes, and for the royal family in the UK particularly, historically, they have remained very private. I mean, usually, for example, for the birth of a child, happy news, you only get perhaps a couple of lines about it. So this is highly unusual. It was also highly unusual that the King shared his cancer diagnosis with the nation. This was a very personal message filmed, of the Princess of Wales, one-on-one to camera. And she was very careful about thanking her medical team. I think that people are going to take time to digest this message and to understand it. I don't think that there will be an expectation of more communication. I think there will be a few days where this will be digested. This is an incredibly important year for the UK because we are coming up to potentially another general election within the next few months, at least by next January. And although the head of state, the King in the UK, is a ceremonial figure, it is a very important one. And as Guy was mentioning, there seemed to be a hint that there was perhaps a quicker transition of power between the generations than we had thought. I think that we don't know what type of cancer the princess has been diagnosed with. Mm-hmm. That remains undisclosed, and we don't know yet when that chemotherapy began. Some speculation in the UK press that it began perhaps in February.
Caroline, I want to just stick with you for a moment, and let me just remind everyone, if you're just tuning in, Princess Catherine is being treated for cancer. She said in a video statement, shedding light on a royal health crisis, as you know, that has been the subject of intense media speculation in Britain and beyond, coming out and also talking about doing some preventative chemotherapy on the advice of her medical team, and that she's now in the early stages of that treatment. Caroline, let me come back to you. We're talking with Caroline Hepker and Guy Johnson, anchors with our Bloomberg TV European team. You say about the king that he is ceremonial in terms of his position, but it's an important one. We know a little bit about his cancer, and since he is on the throne right now, is there going to be an expectation with the information on Princess Catherine coming out that folks in London, folks in the UK will want to know more specifics about where he is in his diagnosis and his cancer?
Yes, absolutely. I think the public will want information, of course, but I think more importantly, there will be a feeling of the need to rally around the royal family. Although the royal family are, to some, perhaps divisive to people who are, anti-monarchy, I think that there will nonetheless be a very significant feeling of support for the royal family, who are our ambassadors, frankly, abroad, and are really very key to the life of the nation. This coming so swiftly after the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, I think will come as a huge shock to the nation. We had consistency and a sort of stalwart leader for more than 70 years. And so it will be an immense blow that these two leading figures in a very tight-knit royal family have now got these very significant diagnoses. We don't really know the extent of the seriousness either for the king or for Catherine, Princess of Wales. She was videoed, it must be said, in Windsor over the weekend. And so we know that there's intense scrutiny, but I do know that even the Sun newspaper, for example, ran a feature, the newspaper, popular newspaper here in the UK, saying that Catherine deserved privacy. Again, that's quite unusual for newspapers who are usually incredibly hungry for royal news.
Guy, I want to go to you, and I want to, let's just be human about this. Find me somebody whose life has not been affected by cancer. If you look at the World Health Organization, they say about 1 in 5 people will develop cancer in their lifetime around the world. 1 in 9 men and 1 in 12 women will die from the disease. This is a sad, common thing in our world right now, and I'm wondering, Guy, if this is an opportunity for people to see somebody in a high position, in a prominent position, with an affliction that so many people we all know have been affected by.
The royal family are human, and they unfortunately suffer from the same maladies as the rest of us. The fact that the 2 members of the royal family are suffering from cancer at the same time will raise the profile, but this is a disease that is in the headlines regularly. I talk about it as being a single disease. Obviously, that comes in many forms. But this is an issue that is very high profile already in the United Kingdom with regard to how the NHS treats and deals with it, the waiting list, the availability of being able to see an oncologist quickly to be able to obtain treatment for cancer. This is something that is front already in the public discourse in the UK. This will only heighten that. It will only refocus attention if attention wasn't already focused enough on this condition. So I think it will further reinforce the fact that this is something that the UK needs to be on top of, that the UK National Health Service needs to do better on, and that will be something, if you are searching for a positive, a silver lining in this, that may come from that. But nevertheless, it will focus again on some of the difficulties and iniquities, maybe in some of this cancer treatment, and how difficult it is in certain areas of the country to gain quick treatment, where others you gain faster access to the necessary treatment and doctors, oncologists, etc. So this is something that is very much front and center. It will, in some ways, bring the royal family, though, unfortunately, closer to everybody else. That has been a process that has been unfolding for many, many years. Caroline referenced the fact that the king was more open than previous generations would have been with what he was suffering from on the treatment that he was receiving. And I think that is something that, again, speaks to the idea that the royal family and the population of this country country are becoming closer and closer in the way that they are perceived and perceive each other. So it is there are silver linings here, but this is a devastating diagnosis for the royal for Kate, the Princess of Wales, for the royal family, for the institutions of the UK, and also for the general public as well. This is a devastating blow. This is the next generation of the royal family. So much hope has been placed in this next generation of the royal family. This is an incredibly difficult day for this country, and is something that will have implications for a long time. Hopefully, she will make a full and complete recovery. But this will unnerve the country, certainly, because this is the next generation of the royal family that we're talking about here.
Caroline, moments of crisis bring together nations, they bring together factions, they bring together families. And I think about the royal family that was so steady under the reign of Queen Elizabeth, right, for such a long time. And as you say, some fractures. And obviously, I think about Prince Harry, and I do wonder how, I don't know, whether something like this, does it help bring potentially the royal family together at this moments of crisis?
Perhaps, and perhaps one hopes for that, for all families to be strong, I suppose. The issue, I think, that I would point to a couple of things. I imagine there will be an absolute outpouring of, public sympathy and concern, and I wouldn't be surprised if people weren't lining up outside of Buckingham Palace right now and outside of all of the royal palaces. Frankly, that will be quite something to be expected. I think, the Princess of Wales is one, just like the Princess of Wales, Harry and William's mother is one of the most photographed and most intensely speculated women in the world. So I think there'll be definitely an outpouring of support. I think also, though, there has been scrutiny around this issue of privacy. I mean, for example, she was admitted on the 16th of January to the London Clinic, which again is often where the royal family receive treatment in the capital, where the King did also. There was also an issue around, whether certain individuals within that clinic reportedly were trying to access her medical information.
Right.
So there was something of a furore around that issue too. So yes, I think there'll be an outpouring of support. I think this will shake the country, and one hopes that the health diagnosis is very positive. But yes, I think Guy's points around the NHS and the pressure that the health system is under will also come to the fore.
All right. Well, we certainly wish her well and are thinking about her and certainly her family. Caroline Hepker and Guy Johnson of our Bloomberg News team, anchors over there in our European network. We really appreciate your time today. Of course, we've been talking about Princess Catherine coming out in a video message saying that she is indeed being treated for cancer that was found ultimately in some surgery that she had back in January. All right. You're listening and watching Bloomberg Business Week. This is Bloomberg.
Today, I'm going to talk about how to succeed with a startup. Obviously, more than can be said here in 20 minutes, but I will do the best I can. The most important thing, the number one lesson we try to teach startups is that the degree to which you're successful approximates the degree to which you build a product that is so good, people spontaneously tell their friends about it. Startups always ask us for the secret to success. They always want to believe it's something other than this, because this is really hard to do. But this is it. If you can build a product that is so good, people spontaneously tell their friends about it, you have done 80% of the work that you need to be a really successful startup. If you think about the most successful companies you know, Google, Facebook, whatever, you probably found out about them because a friend of yours said, you got to try this, it's great. So this is the bar. Something that people love so much they tell their friends about it. One important indicator for a product like that is a product that's simple to explain and easy to understand. If you can't explain in a few words what you do, and if at least some people don't say, oh, that's pretty interesting, that's usually a mistake. It's usually a sign of unclear thinking or a need that is not big enough.
I want a bank that shows me what I spend instantly.
We're Monzo. Give us a go. See?
Well, I want a bank that can help me budget for the things I need, like a new leather jacket for Bingo.
We can do that.
Bingo's my cockapoo.
Hi, Bingo.
It's a real faff to sign up.
It takes less than 10 minutes.
Race you.
You're on. Time's up. How'd you get on?
It's a draw.
Is it? We hear you, Bingo. You make Monzo Monzo.
Session last year. He also bet that inflation would cool sooner than the market was expecting. He added exposure to stocks during the banking turmoil last March and as the S&P 500 sank in October. In hindsight, pretty good calls, and it's why Bloomberg included Ryan in a story about the stock optimists who nailed 2023, and that was back in December.
You get to wear that mantle for a little while longer, Ryan. Let's get to the interview. With us is Ryan Dietrich. He's Chief Market Strategist at the Carson Group. He's back with us from Cincinnati. Good to have you back with us. We have had quite a run. This could be the best week that we've seen all year. Does it feel like technically or even fundamentally in your view that we're getting a little frothy, that there's time that we need a little bit of a maybe correction or at least a little bit of a pullback?
Yeah, Carol, Tim, thanks for having me back. And as someone whose mom passed away last year due to cancer, obviously thinking about Princess Kate and the whole royal family and all of our friends over in England and London there with the UK, I guess, with everything that just came out in the last hour or so.
Thank you for that.
But getting to the question there, no easy way to transform from what we just talked about, but let's just do it. Listen, yes, we are looking at maybe a 27% rally in 21 weeks since that late October low. That's one of the greatest 21-week rallies ever. Today could be, fingers crossed, the 21st all-time high already this year for the S&P 500. If you extrapolate that out, guys, that's like over 90. What does that mean? The previous record was 77 all-time highs in 95, meaning this could be in theory, one of the best years we've ever seen. Yes, we think maybe we're due for a little pause. We've been overweight equities. I've come on with you for a while saying we're still bullish. We don't see a recession. We just have to be, be aware that one final comment. What happened yesterday, 118 stocks in the S&P 500 made a 52-week high. The highest number we've seen in 3 years, okay? That can be sometimes a near-term kind of, I don't say blow off top's the right word, but at least need for consolidation. But rarely, with that many stocks making a 52-week high, does that mean the ultimate peak? This happened, like March and April of 21. Remember what happened the rest of 21? Pretty good year last I checked. So we're still bullish, but hey, maybe we're due for a little break.
When you say a little break, a little bit of a pullback that we're due for, what are you talking about, Ryan? What would be within your model?
Yeah, I mean, well, between 5 to 7% will be perfectly normal, nothing abnormal. I mean, for the S&Ps, like we talked about, up 10% for the year, up 27% the last 21 weeks. And again, what's been happening, what's so impressive, and you guys have talked a lot about this. If you told me Apple will be doing what it's been doing, Tesla's doing what it's doing, and we kick back the idea of when the rate cuts will be and how many there will be, I just said, you know what? Market might be in a little trouble. That's not what's happened, right? What have we seen? Rotation. You've got small caps and mid caps doing really well this week after the Fed, but we're more impressed with the industrial leadership, the cyclical leadership, your financials, your materials. The fact that those groups are doing well, to us, message of the market, cyclical leadership says, hey, this is strong, and maybe we can just kind of have the baton passed around, and we're still, those are the groups we've liked, and we still like them.
Interesting. So, because I was just looking at some of the notes when we wrote the story, Bloomberg News put the story out back in December. You said small caps, mid caps, and financials. Those are three of your favorites. They continue to be three of your favorites. Recession, that's not even in your playbook at all for 2024?
Well, it's not. It actually wasn't in our playbook last year. That wasn't very popular when we said that last year. But no, we still don't see a recession. I mean, earnings this year expected to be up 10, 11%. And I know those are estimates. That can potentially change. But the bottom line, the consumer is still strong. Look at those initial claims, still around 200,000. We know the big layoffs some of the big tech companies have had, but we're just not seeing that go into the consumer. I mean, consumer is still strong, still healthy. And final comment, wages are like 4 to 5% this year. Inflation's around 3.5%. I mean, wages are still growing faster than inflation. That's normally a positive sign, and we still think the consumer is going to lead this economy the rest of this year, maybe even further.
Hey, Ryan, we spoke to somebody yesterday who's not necessarily on the same page, and look, this is what makes a market, but curious what you'd say to her. Cheryl Smith over at Trillium Asset Management. She's an economist. She's a portfolio manager there. She thinks we're 4 to 6 months away from a recession. She's starting to see cracks or softness, she said, in many of the state unemployment figures. She's seeing credit card delinquencies going up. What say you of that data?
Yeah, we are starting to see some of that, those delinquencies. I can't disagree. I mean, it is what it is. But again, when you look at those, is it more normalizing? We had historically low delinquencies this time 2 years ago, right, with all the government giving people money and different things. Now we think it's more normalizing right now. And the other side to that, I mean, listen, the interest rates are higher. There's a lot of debt out there. People are paying a lot more interest on the debt that they have. People seem to forget, though, the other side of that, I mean, $6 trillion in money markets. I'm not so sure that's just going to leave money markets go to stocks. I'll be very clear. But people are comfortable getting their 4 to 5%. If you look what's happened in the last 3 years, the money people are paying on interest for debt over here is actually offset by what they're getting on interest in their money markets. People don't always talk about that. And again, I know a lot of people are struggling, but just the truth, net wealth's at all-time high. Net wealth's actually growing faster. Assets are growing faster than liabilities. You look at the data from the Fed. So it's not perfect. But again, I don't see a recession in 6 months, put it that way.
Hey, Ryan, what's stronger, the technical story for stocks to continue to move higher or the fundamental story for stocks to head higher?
Yeah, I think the technical, I mean, great question. I mean, we've got a little bit of both, but I think it is a technical. I just talked about all those new highs that we just saw. We had the 50th trading day of the year last week. We were up more than 5% as of the 50th trading day, Carol. I took a look. What happens? It's a good start to a year. Let's be clear. 25 times. We, at the 50th day, we're up at least 5%. The rest of the year was higher. You ready for this? 24 out of 25 times. I've grown with you guys a lot using stats like that, and I know they're just one stat. Don't invest blindly in anything, one stat. But we've seen a lot of those, factoring in the fact that what the Fed has said, there's probably 3 cuts coming. The Fed just upgraded their view on GDP. I mean, I hate to say it's like this, perfect nirvana that we're living in right now, but it really is. Things are a lot better. And maybe what worries me, though, guys, I know it's a logical question. What worries me the most? I'm looking around, and a lot of people that were bearish last year are now bullish.
Well,
a lot of people are optimistic right now. That kind of worries me a little bit, right? What'd Patton say? If everybody's thinking alike, somebody isn't thinking. I mean, maybe that's where that little well-deserved break could be needed, because there's a lot of Johnny-come-lately bulls that they were yelling at me a year ago.
Ryan, election year, that's one thing.
Yeah.
And then, okay, so now you said, too, that we're kind of expecting the Fed to make 3 rate cuts. If they don't do that, and then let's throw on the election year on top of it, those are 2 big things. Does that in any way kind of change or could change your outlook, your optimistic outlook here?
I mean, it could change it a little bit, but I mean, honestly, what were we looking for? 5 or 6 cuts this time 2 months ago, and now we're looking at 3 cuts probably. Why? Because the economy's been stronger. In 2022, the Fed was more hawkish, if you will, because of inflation. Now they're a little bit more hawkish than where they were 2 months ago because the economy's strong. So we like that. Real quickly on the election, a lot of people have talked about this, but in an election year, when you have a president up for re-election, like we do, the last 10 times, going back to the 50s with Eisenhower, the S&P 500 was higher every single time, 10 out of 10, up 12% on average. It's almost where we are now. But just because it's an election year, don't get overly concerned or worried. History says election years do just fine, especially with an economy strong like this one.
Hey, Ryan, what changes your mind? What turns you bearish? What data would you need to see over the next few months in order to change your view?
Yeah, great question there. So as someone who looks at the market from a technical point of view, if we started to see leadership from areas like utilities, like staples, a real estate, that would worry me. That if people forget this. In late 2021, it was a great bull market. Where was the leadership in the fourth quarter? Those more defensive areas, and we all know what happened, obviously, in 2022. But fast forward to right now, we're seeing relative strength lows in utilities and staples. So I'm not seeing that yet. So that's the first kind of crack to me if the defensive things start to lead. We're not seeing it. We're seeing cyclicals lead. So that's still a reason to be bullish.
Any new names for the upside or downside that have popped up on your radar? Just got about 45 seconds left.
Well, I know individual names, but we like mid caps a lot. I mean, mid caps are that area. Everyone talks about small caps, large caps. I mean, mid caps are up about 8-9% for the year. Nobody's talking about it, right? I mean, I think that's an area that quietly could do very, very well this year, as everyone argues about, the Red Sox or the Yankees or small caps or large caps. We like mid caps a lot, Carol.
All right, going to leave it on that note. I'm looking at the S&P 500 mid-cap 400 index. It's up about 7.6% so far here in 2024. Hey, Ryan, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Ryan Dietrich joining us, Chief Market Strategist at the Carson Group, joining us once again from Cincinnati. On a day, Tim, where we are seeing stocks bounce around a bunch. You've got the S&P just up about 1.5 points now. The NASDAQ 100 is up almost 45 points, so up about 0.25%. But we've been up, down. We've seen the market kind of move back and forth here.
Yeah, and as far as the year looks, Carol, the Dow up 5% so far this year. You heard Ryan mention it. Worth repeating, though, the S&P 500 up already just, before April, 10% so far this year. The NASDAQ Composite up 9.6% so far this year.
Yeah, so we're continuing to see those large caps really powering ahead. All right, everybody, Ryan Dietrich, again, our thanks to him. Hey, coming up, just think back about 12 months ago, we were talking so much about the regional bank sector, in particular, what happened, the failure at Silicon Valley Bank. We've got a great guest coming up. We're going to talk to the CEO of PNC Bank. He's coming our way in just a moment.
In the meantime, let's get a check of the latest world and national news. For that, we head to our DC newsroom and find Amy Morris. Hey, Amy.
Hey, Tim. Catherine, Princess of Wales, you guys were just talking about it. She's being treated for cancer. She released a video statement shedding some light on why she has been out of the spotlight for weeks. She did not reveal what type of cancer she has. She did say that she started on what she describes as preventive chemotherapy. Lawmakers in the House passed a $1.2 trillion package to fund the government. Now the Senate's taking it up, racing the clock to beat a midnight deadline. Before the vote, Democrat Hakeem Jeffries of New York took to the House floor to support the package.
A bipartisan process leading to a bipartisan result that will hopefully lay a foundation for us to continue to do the work of the American people together.
Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries. Now, that deadline is midnight tonight. The Senate still has to pass it before it can go to the president's desk. Hard-right Republicans, though, not happy that this legislation even made it to the House floor for a vote. Republican Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene took the first steps to remove Mike Johnson as House Speaker, threatening other potential GOP shakeups and more infighting ahead of the November elections. Greene could force a vote on the motion at any point the House is in session, and that would grind all House business to a halt. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg.
Another thing that startups need to look for is a market that is either started to undergo or is soon going to undergo exponential growth. I think this is actually related to one of the biggest mistakes investors make when evaluating startups. Investors always say, well, what's your growth rate? We care about the growth rate. Investors will forgive smallish revenue today if it's growing quickly. For some reason, people don't think about markets this way. But if you think about the most important startups, they are the ones that I start in small markets that are growing very, very quickly. 11 years ago, the market for iPhone apps was $0. It's now huge. And I think if you only think about the TAM today, you'll make a big mistake. What you really want to do is identify a market that's going to grow every year and be able to ride that up elevator.
Welcome to the digital age. Are you struggling to stand out here? Don't worry. Meet Blue TV, who is your digital superhero.
Blue TV is a multi-purpose online media network that also provides digital marketing services. We are based in Islamabad, Pakistan. We are expert in creative marketing, social media and digital marketing, search engine optimization, web design, page rank, and SERPs, video editing, recording and production.
So, what are you waiting for? Pick up the phone and call or WhatsApp Blue TV on given number, or visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/blue.online.tv.
With Blue TV, your business growth will be skyrocketed.
I want a bank that shows me what I spend instantly.
We're Monzo. Give us a go. See?
I want a bank that can help me budget for the things I need, like a new leather jacket for Bingo.
We can do that.
Bingo's my cockapoo.
Hi, Bingo.
It's a real faff to sign up.
It takes less than 10 minutes.
Race you.
You're on. Time's up. How'd you get on?
It's a draw.
Is it? We hear you, Bingo. You make Monzo Monzo.
My general advice is continue to seek out companies or people that are maybe one stage or two stages ahead of you. And I think this is generalizable to not just to startups, but anyone seeking fast growth in their own professional lives, in their careers too. What does greatness look like? Try to seek out people who've been there, done that before, and then try to not connect with one, but try to interview 3, 5, 10 people to see what is a general pattern of greatness that look like that will get you to the next level of the company, next stage, maybe a year, 12 months from now, 24 months from now. Seek out people who kind of went down the path a few times. Then you'll start to find this pattern that start to emerge. What are things that you need to have 12 months from now, 24 months from now that you currently don't have? Then try to build a path towards that. Almost like Amazon's or Jeff Bezos' mantra of working backwards. Think about what your end game or next stage look like, and then figure out your steps to getting there, and who do you need to work with, upgrading or coaching your existing team or recruiting from somewhere else to really level your leadership. Because ultimately, the job of a CEO is to do 3 things, right? One is get the strategy right for your company, making sure it's executed, get the right teams onboarded, getting the resources, whether it be fundraising or allocating your resources. So strategy, people, or team, figuring out how you need to navigate those things to get to the next level.
Lower than expected outlooks right now. Those shares are down just over 15%. Then you have FedEx planning to buy back $5 billion of its shares, adjusted earnings for the third quarter, topping expectations. And lighter than usual volume for this Friday trading session. S&P 500 up a point, 52.42. We'll still take it. Dow Jones Industrial Average 194 points lower. That's down 0.5%. But Nasdaq 100 is up 42 points. That's a rise of just about 0.25%. Also, Treasury yields on the move. The 2-year 4 basis points lower, 4.59. The 10-year right now, that's 5 basis points lower at 4.21. We check the markets for you all day long, right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Carol and Tim.
Hey, John Tucker, thank you so much
You're
for that
very
update.
welcome.
Really do appreciate it. It's hard to believe it's been a little more than a year since a key lender in the world of technology and startups came undone, collapsing and requiring the U.S. federal government to step in. That failure, the second largest in U.S. history and the largest since the financial crisis of 2008, it wasn't alone in terms of troubles in the regional banking sector. Signature Bank, First Republic, and the group continues to be on everyone's radar.
It does indeed. And with one perspective, and why we have heard a lot of senior execs in the banking sector talk about the value of being boring, that is, including our next guest. With us now is none other than the chairman and CEO of PNC Financial Services, home to PNC Bank, Bill Demchak. He's joining us now from Pittsburgh. Bill, great to have you here with us. And I got to ask, is that a Bloomberg behind you?
Of course it's a Bloomberg.
All right.
So nobody send Bill an IB right now. He's on TV.
I am probably one of your earliest Bloomberg clients.
Interesting.
Way back to the early 90s on the trading floor.
All right. There are some stories there, not only about that, but also about what you have seen. Well, let's start there. I mean, I really appreciate someone who has been within the financial industry and then the banking industry for a while. You've seen a fair amount of cycles. You've seen crises. What's the best word to describe today's banking environment and kind of business and economic environment? And they don't have to be the same word.
Yeah. Look, I think banking is a little bit unique at the moment because we're in this uncertain period, as a function of pending regulation, the impact of interest rates and when the Fed's going to ease or not ease. So it's a little bit different. I think the economy is kind of what you read about. It feels pretty healthy. It's slowing at the margin from a rapid pace. Labor's good. And at least inside of PNC, we're largely on the same page with Chair Powell on his recent comments.
What can you tell us about your customers right now? And I ask because we had a really interesting conversation with the president and CEO of Citizens Bank of Edmond. I mean, this is a tiny bank in Oklahoma, one physical branch, and they have an online business with 1,000 customers. So, I mean, we're talking tiny. But Jill Castilla told us yesterday that she's never seen a better environment for her customers. Things are really, really good right now.
It's Jill's actually a good friend. She's not wrong. On the corporate side, there's areas of weakness, but there's a lot of areas of strength, particularly as we kind of lean into manufacturing and onshoring again. The consumer, it varies by income level. We've obviously seen basic wages increase a lot, particularly at the lower level. But at the same time, we've seen the prices of their staple goods increase more, compounded through time than their wages have, even though in many instances wages have doubled. So, it varies.
Well, and we kicked off here, Bill, getting into you that 1 year, essentially, a little bit more than 1 year since Silicon Valley Bank and the collapse of it. Do you feel like we're out of that environment? And I think one thing we have learned is, right, that not every bank, not every regional is the same and in terms of their exposure. But we're still kind of a little concerned about commercial real estate, not sure that we've gotten through that. So when it comes to concerns within some of the banking sector, do you think that we could see more trouble still, depending on their exposures?
At the margin, probably in smaller banks, most of which you will never have heard of. I think, first of all, as you know, I don't particularly like the term regional. It's not very descriptive of anything anymore, particularly in a digital age. But
so I'm not going to call you a super regional, which people call you sometimes.
No, I don't know what to. We're a national bank.
I know you are.
Ad campaign in a second, but practically, and you see the same numbers I do, is banks get smaller, they tend to have a higher concentration of real estate. Their concentration of real estate tends to be more fixed rate, medium term in length, and B and C properties, so permanent financing on older B and C properties, which is kind of the area that's going to get hit the most in a higher rate environment with, increased office vacancies. But it's not a systemic issue, certainly for the banking industry, not for any of the names you will otherwise know, and we'll make our way through it.
Well, let's talk more broadly just about real estate and talk to us a little bit about your own exposure to real estate and commercial real estate. How can you characterize that for us?
Look, it's a small percentage of our total loans, not a big percentage of our capital. We have, plus or minus $8.5 billion, I guess, in total what you would define as office, and that is where all the spotlight is. It's starting to shine on multifamily, but we're not seeing stress in multifamily at the moment, notwithstanding, news that you might see out of New York and affordable and other places. Generic multifamily is doing just fine. But inside of office, say we have that $8.5 billion, there's about $4.5 billion to $5 billion that is multi-tenant, and that's where the problem is. And we expect problems there, and we're reserved to quite a high level against it. And thus far as we've cycled through, these projects that go non-performing, we've actually been conservative in what we've been reserving. So we feel okay about it. We're heavily reserved today. It's gonna, most of our stuff comes due over the next year or so. It's kind of project-based. They come online. So we're gonna know the answer to this pretty quickly, I suspect.
Interesting. Hey, listen, we also said that boring is something that you guys are tapping into. We've got a great chart that we can share with those who are watching right now that our producer Elizabeth is going to share out with everybody. But it talks about bank management, not just your own, but others using boring on calls this year, quarterly update calls and earnings calls. It is up a lot. Boring, not a bad thing. And you guys have an advertising campaign that you are stressing that.
No, we do. I mean, I'll make a couple of points. I think if you look back in history, I've talked about our bank and banking in general is kind of 3 yards in a cloud of dust, and you grow, with GDP, and if you're good at it, you can outpace that. But we are, by our very nature as an industry, when you see outliers to that, there tends to be something going on underneath that. And when we think about, we use the word boring. I don't necessarily like to think of myself as a boring person, but
I didn't mean
banking
that.
ought to be. No, I get it, but boring. Banking shouldn't be drama for our clients. It ought to be predictable, consistent. Stuff works. They know their money's safe. They don't have to read about us in the headlines.
Right.
And that's who we are. That's how we define ourselves. We to the core of this company,
Bill.
to the very best of our ability, we try to do right by all of our constituents every day. And when we screw it up, we fix it.
Bill, we're going to leave it on that note, but hope we can get you back here real soon. Bill Demchak, he's CEO at PNC Bank, joining us from Pittsburgh. You are listening and watching Bloomberg Business Week. Coming back, one more thing. That's next.
company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
And hi, I'm John Tucker in the newsroom with your company news. Well, like an old sneaker in your gym bag, Nike may need a refresh. The world's largest sportswear retailer warning sales may take a hit. They're getting a run for their money from sneaker upstarts. Nike still has a big seller in its classic Air Jordan franchise, but they say they will shift the sneaker offerings away from some of the most classic styles. Now, to get a sense of just what kind of news that is, it's kind of like, well, you know, Pegasus running shoes. This is akin to Louis Vuitton saying it's going to discontinue its Neverfull handbag, or Levi moving away from its famous 501 jeans. Medicare prescription drug programs can now cover Novo Nordisk's blockbuster weight loss drug Wegovy for heart disease. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid saying in a statement it told Part D plans that anti-obesity medications that receive approval for additional uses can be covered for those indications. But none of the major Part D plans responded to questions about whether they would start covering the drug. Experts say it's unlikely Medicare will broadly cover GLP-1 drugs like Wegovy and Eli Lilly's Zepbound anytime soon. Now, covering the drugs for weight loss at their current prices, that would actually cost U.S. health programs more than the savings seen from the medication's benefits. And according to the journal Build-A-Bear, seeing the effects of the attacks on commercial shipping in the Red Sea on its supply chain, shoppers may too. The shipping costs and the time it takes to get materials needed for the company's plush bears, cats, and bunnies are up because of disruptions the attacks are causing on ocean transport. And that's a look at some of your company news. I'm John Tucker.
This is Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
It is Bloomberg Business Week. Let's get a check on the latest world and national news. For that, we go to Amy Morris, who's in the Bloomberg 991 newsroom in Washington, D.C. Hey, Amy.
All right, everybody, we're just having some technical difficulties getting to Amy Morris to do a little bit of a look at world and national news. But as you know, atop the list, atop the Bloomberg right now, Princess Catherine, a story about Princess Catherine being treated for cancer. She put this out in a video statement earlier today, shedding light on a royal health crisis that has certainly been in the news for several months. She, of course, the Princess of Wales, wife to the heir of the British throne, Prince William, said today that her scheduled abdominal surgery, which was back in January, uncovered the presence of cancer. She has subsequently been undergoing chemotherapy, which, Tim, she described as preventative.
Yeah, she said she's 42 years old, and in this video message, she said, quote, "I'm now in the early stages of that treatment. This, of course, came as a huge shock, and William and I have been doing everything we can to process and manage this privately for the sake of our family." And Carol, as we've been talking about, it is the latest health setback for the British royal family, whose longevity was symbolized by Queen Elizabeth's 70-year reign. This announcement coming 6 weeks after the royal family disclosed that King Charles III was also receiving treatment for an unspecified cancer in 18 months since the Queen's death.
And one more story in world and national news. The U.S. House of Representatives passing a $1.2 trillion government funding bill just hours before midnight Friday partial government shutdown deadline, rebuffing conservatives' demands for deep cuts to domestic spending. Feels like deja vu all over again. In response, hardline Republican Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia took the first steps toward ousting House Speaker Mike Johnson. It wasn't immediately clear whether other Republicans would join her or even whether she would follow through on the threat by forcing a vote on his removal. But it's really been, I feel like over the last couple of months or so, we are constantly talking about a possible shutdown, getting some kind of a deal, and kind of just moving along in terms of the deadline to ultimately getting a big deal. I feel like I need a little levity.
Okay, I do too.
Good.
I talked about Fusilli Jerry.
And this we're doing because it's also among the most read stories on the Bloomberg.
I mentioned Fusilli Jerry.
Yes.
If you know what I'm talking about.
And if you don't, just turn away, go somewhere else, because you should know about Seinfeld.
It's a great episode of Seinfeld. The reason we're talking about Seinfeld is because for the first time ever, the folks over at the Bloomberg Billionaires Index has calculated the net worth of Jerry Seinfeld, and drum roll, yes, he's a billionaire thanks to his show about nothing.
Comic, fancy cars, Fusilli jury, and now he's a billionaire. Hey, listen, here's what it comes to. A key portion of his fortune, Jerry Seinfeld's fortune, comes from a series of syndication deals for the sitcom. That netted him about $465 million. That's according to Bloomberg estimates. You had that Netflix deal for the streaming rights. That brought an additional $94 million. He has also earned, what, more than $100 million since the 1980s from touring, according to the estimate. And then you've got to throw in about $40 million of real estate. But you take it, and then you have to kind of assume that he invested it in munis, I'm thinking. I don't know what he invested in.
No, I mean, look.
But you have to assume, right? You have to
yeah,
take
the
that
folks
money
over
and
at the
invest
Bloomberg
it.
Billionaires Index, they said that they are making the assumption that he invested his earnings beginning in 1990. And this is appreciated in line with the historic performance of the MSCI World Index.
How old
he's
is
69 years old.
Yeah.
And one interesting thing about this, among the many, is that vintage car collection that got famous in Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee, that series, that is not included in this calculation of his net worth.
Huh.
Yeah.
So there's more.
There's more.
We've got to count. Hey, listen, Jerry Seinfeld said, he told the New York Times in 2012, I like money, but it's never been about the money. But it doesn't hurt. That's my quote. All right, everybody, that's going to do it for us. If you're staying on TV, the close is coming up next. Tim and I, though, got lots to cover on Bloomberg Business Week, including Apple, which seems like every day in the news. Do not go anywhere. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, everybody, we're just about 1 hour away from the closing bell, getting ready to wrap up the Friday session, the week that was. And what a week it has been.
Yeah, the S&P 500 on pace right now for its best week of the year. What did Ryan Dietrich say? 21?
Yeah.
Records if we close in the green today, which, by the way,
John Tucker did too. He's feeling a little left out because
we
he's been
might
tracking
not. We're flat on the
Glad you
S&P
listened to me.
Oh, is that John Tucker?
Wait, we're not done yet. We're
Hey,
not
John
done
Tucker.
yet.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
John Tucker filling in for Charlie Pellet and kind of, getting a lay of the land
Who
right
just
now.
happens to be on a flight to, of all places, where in the world is Charlie Pellet? Nepal, the
Yeah.
Himalayas.
Yeah. Where, we're on radio, TV, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals. I'm not sure if he's going to get us up there.
You never know.
You never know. Hey, look, before we get to John, we just want to remind you, we are going to talk a lot about Apple over the next couple of hours. There's been a headline every day. There's a double dose of news. So we're going to check in with our own Mark Urban. And then we've got a special guest catching up with the Bloomberg TV team, Apple co-founder Steve Wozniak. So we're going to see what he has to say about everything that's come down this week alone.
Okay, so that stuff has come down. What about stuff that's gone up, like IPOs this week? Reddit and Astera Labs, in particular, on their first days of trading. Astera continuing